Hey guys! Tonight we follow the faint click of polished shoes along a midnight alley in Osaka, the kind where vending machines hum like distant insects and shadows stretch too far. A cigarette tip burns red at the corner, held by a hand that rarely gestured. The man behind that ember doesn't need to speak to be obeyed. You might imagine you could handle a life in organized crime if it meant big suits, big money, and dramatic moments. But honestly, you probably wouldn't survive a week in Yoshinori Watanabe's version of it. Too quiet, too sharp, too exact. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're tuning in from somewhere late, drop your city and local time in the comments. I love seeing where the night finds each of us. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The year is 1941, and Yoshinori Watanabe enters the world not in a palace, not in a temple, but in the industrial haze of Kobe. The streets smell of salt and steel, the scent of a city rebuilding itself after decades of political whiplash. He's born into a country still dusting itself off from the throes of militarism. Japan's economy is already on edge, and men like Watanabe's father disappear into its machines, both literal and metaphorical. That's exactly what happens. His father, a stonemason by trade, never returns home from a wartime labor contract. Maybe conscripted, maybe gone willingly, maybe a number on some ledger that's since yellowed with age. But whatever the reason, it leaves Watanabe's mother to carry the household, stoic, proper, and quiet. She never remarries, never complains, just folds his school uniform every morning with origami precision. Watanabe watches and learns, not just the motions, but the meaning behind them. Her silence is not passivity, it's intention, it's resistance disguised as routine. At school, young Yoshinori is forgettable in the way future powerhouses often are. He never starts fights, but he's never bullied. He doesn't excel in class, but his penmanship is admired. Teachers note how clean his desk is. One even writes in his file that Watanabe blinks before answering, like he's considering multiple timelines at once. He's not the type to charm a room, but he is the type who remembers who didn't refill the teapot last Tuesday. A boy who tidies the erasers before anyone notices, who always sits facing the door and outside of school. He spends long afternoons helping his mother sell fish at the market. He guts mackerel with quiet precision, learning where to press the knife so it doesn't damage the flesh. His hands become good at separating things, meat from bone, clean from dirty, necessary from emotional. Mainstream historians often paint the post-war generation as lost, children swallowed by rubble, hunger, and crime. But not Watanabe. Many people still think that he saw in the chaos not despair, but opportunity. So what do you think? Is it possible that some people find their rhythm only in disorder? At 16, while his classmates flirt with cinema and motorcycles, Watanabe reads a book on administrative reform in Meiji-era governance. For fun. The librarian, puzzled, orders another copy just to make sure he hadn't stolen the original. But despite his discipline and intellect, life pulls him toward labor. In the booming Reconstruction era, work is valued above wisdom. So he becomes a construction apprentice, mixing cement by hand, waking before the sun, and managing small crews by age 20. His co-workers are rough men, full of laughter and exhaustion. Watanabe doesn't joke much, but he never misses payday calculations. They trust him. One day, When a foreman is caught skimming materials and disappears overnight, the site doesn't descend into chaos. Watanabe simply steps forward, clipboard in hand, and says, "The trucks still come at 8. Let's get ready." No drama, no threats, just order. And that's when someone notices. A man in a charcoal suit with a badge of no official department offers him a job, not in concrete, but in connections. The kind of job where you don't need a business card because your presence is the credential. It's the first time Watanabe walks into a tea house and is served without speaking. The Yamaguchi-gumi is no longer a street gang by then. It's a business, a portfolio, a web of unspoken transactions tied together by formality and fear. And Watanabe, with his silent strength and unassuming stare, slides into this world like a drawer closing with precision. His first test isn't a knife fight. It's a spreadsheet. Who owes who missed what, and why. He reorganizes debt ledgers for 3 gambling dens in 3 days. Money starts arriving on time again. A senior Oyabun comments, "He doesn't blink unless it matters." This is how his legend begins. Not with blood, but with balance. The absence of a father never quite leaves him. It sits in Watanabe's memory like a shadow that forgot to attach itself to someone. In a society that prides itself on hierarchy, tradition, and paternal guidance, being raised solely by a mother makes him an anomaly. But not a broken one. Just edited. There's no room for pity in his childhood, and certainly none in his mother's kitchen. She teaches him to fold the futon edge perfectly, to trim bean sprouts at an angle that respects the knife. But most importantly, she teaches him that speaking less makes others reveal more. He learns that silence isn't absence, it's invitation. People fill silence with truths they didn't mean to share. By the time he's 25, Watanabe has become the kind of man who listens to the end of a sentence and then pauses, just long enough to make you wonder if you said too much. He doesn't ask for status, but it follows him. Like an obedient dog, really. Always 2 steps behind, never barking. Around this time, post-war Japan is shifting. The American occupation has ended, but the echoes remain. English words in ads, jazz in cafes, and corruption in new suits. The economy is a paradox, brutal, but blooming. And for young men without university degrees but with sharp minds and calm pulses, the underworld offers structure, predictability, even dignity. It's in this backdrop that Watanabe is officially introduced to the Yamaguchi-gumi, not as an errand boy, not as muscle, but as something much more dangerous. A trusted pair of eyes. He starts attending meetings not for what's said, but for what's implied. He watches lieutenants debate shipment routes, gambling territory, and bribe logistics, all while maintaining honorific politeness. If someone raises their voice, Watanabe notes the weakness, not the passion. He rarely speaks unless directly addressed. And when he does, it's usually to ask a clarifying question that cuts through 10 minutes of posturing. Something like, "But will the merchant sign it by Wednesday?" He doesn't charm. He clarifies. One boss jokes, Watanabe's idea of a threat is asking for a deadline, and it works. Because behind that quiet is a mind that audits more than it speaks. He remembers names, dates, shipping numbers. When a ledger error pops up between 2 crews in different prefectures, Watanabe is the one who cross-references the invoices, finds the pattern, and suggests a meeting. Again, not to accuse, but to clarify intentions. Many people still think that Watanabe's power didn't come from force. but from the fear of being misunderstood by him. So, what do you think? Can silence become its own kind of pressure? As the 1960s roll in, Japan's economy is soaring, and so is the syndicate's footprint. The Yamaguchi-gumi is expanding beyond the docks and alleyways. Real estate, entertainment, trucking, everything needs consultation. And Watanabe, without ever asking, becomes the unofficial fixer for disputes that don't need blood, just balance. One such case. A bar owner in Osaka refuses to pay dues. Instead of sending enforcers, Watanabe shows up, drinks tea at the counter, and gently asks, "You serve whiskey here, right?" The man nods. "How do you keep it from going sour?" The owner stammers, "It doesn't go sour." Watanabe sips his tea. Exactly. The next morning, the bar sends its dues, plus extra. No threats, just gravity. Internally, some of the older bosses aren't sure what to make of him. He doesn't gamble. He doesn't drink to excess. He avoids brothels entirely. Rumor has it he prefers libraries over lounges. They call him the clerk, not out of mockery, but unease. And yet, when internal disputes arise, it's Watanabe who's asked to mediate. He listens, leans back, and lets both parties tire themselves out before offering something like, "I think the debt is emotional, not financial." No one knows quite what that means, but somehow both sides leave satisfied. There's a growing trend in Japan during these years: corporate culture. Suits replace robes, briefcases replace blades, and Watanabe leans into it. He begins drafting internal codes of conduct, dress codes, payment schedules. He introduces administrative reviews for regional captains. Men who once used knives to settle turf disputes now nervously prepare quarterly reports. It's not glamorous, but it's efficient, and it makes money. Lots of it. Watanabe also does something few gangsters do. He keeps records, not in ledgers lying around, but in his mind. He memorizes birthdays, anniversaries, old debts, alliances. He sends flowers to a retired enforcer's mother when she passes. Quietly, no signature. But the message is unmistakable. You're still seen. In Kobe, the city begins to change, and so does the syndicate. They start investing in construction companies, lending operations, even some shadowy involvement in the film industry. And Watanabe is always at the center, not with a spotlight, but like the steel in reinforced concrete, unseen but unyielding. Still, he has no bodyguards, no flashy car, just a dark sedan that smells faintly of ink and leather. His driver never turns on the radio. There's a photo taken around this time, a rare one. It shows Watanabe at a funeral, holding an umbrella for an elder. He's the only one in frame, not looking at the camera. Instead, he's watching the rain fall on the edge of the cemetery wall. Later, when shown the photo, he quietly says, "Even walls forget eventually." Historical fact. Japan's post-war reconstruction saw the fastest economic growth rate in the world during the 1960s, turning it into a global powerhouse. The black market syndicates that had flourished during occupation either disappeared or adapted. And no one adapted more elegantly than Watanabe. But the real turning point was still to come. Because climbing a ladder is one thing, but climbing quietly? That's when people really start to worry. It's the late 1960s now. And if Watanabe feels anything about the turbulence of student protests, shifting political tides, or global unrest, he doesn't show it. Japan may be screaming at itself in universities and newspapers, but Watanabe continues his routine with the precision of a railway timetable. The world burns in protest. He makes tea at exactly 5:45 a.m. His mornings begin with a small charcoal stove, one porcelain cup, and a paper notebook, always blank, always closed. No one ever sees him write in it, but he keeps it with him, always. This is the era when his work shifts from internal operations to external influence. He's asked, softly, respectfully, to step in and oversee logistics between Yamaguchi-gumi's dealings and local governments. Not through bribes, not even through threats, but through favors. Watanabe's approach is elegant. He doesn't offer money, he offers solutions. A stalled project gets its cement. A councilman's nephew gets a job in a security firm. A rival construction company suddenly finds its steel supplier delayed. And yet there's no trail, no paper, just gratitude and silence. One city planner, interviewed decades later, says, "I never met him, but I felt his approval." Around this time, Watanabe gains access to higher meetings, those where territory is discussed not with knives on maps, but with fountain pens over sake. He is still not the loudest voice, but now his silence shapes the mood. He doesn't argue, he waits, and eventually people begin checking their opinions against his expression before they finish speaking. It's during one of these meetings that something strange happens. A younger lieutenant raises his voice, just slightly. He's frustrated over a turf negotiation gone sour, and Watanabe, without flinching, simply says, "The problem is not the other party. The problem is, you wanted them to be you." No one interrupts again. It's said that Watanabe becomes known as a mirror. People see themselves more clearly around him, and not always comfortably. His ability to recall names, even of minor players, is uncanny. A clerk from a Sapporo front office once delivers him a briefcase. 3 years later, Watanabe passes him in Tokyo and says, "Your father's fish market, did he ever rebuild after the typhoon?" The man reportedly bursts into tears. He doesn't use these moments for leverage. That's what makes them powerful. He uses them like punctuation, brief, sharp, and undeniable. Around this time, many believe Watanabe begins compiling mental lists, not of enemies, but of inefficiencies, men who are too loud, crews that miss delivery quotas, fronts that draw unnecessary attention. He never disciplines them directly. Instead, he suggests reorganization. Often, those reassigned find themselves transferred to locations that only offer vending machines and empty warehouses. One such man, Katsu, ends up running a toll booth under a new name. When asked what happened, he shrugs. Nothing. Just Watanabe's face got quiet one day. But while his influence grows, so does the complexity of his world. The 1970s bring economic changes. Inflation bites. Foreign investors sniff around Japan's real estate markets. Police surveillance sharpens. And still, Watanabe doesn't blink. Mainstream historians often debate this. How did he avoid arrest during an era where many bosses fell? Some say he simply avoided risk. Others claim he was too useful to too many. Many people still think that his real strength was in how little he could be blamed for. So what do you think? Can power really exist without fingerprints? Despite the pressure, he begins mentoring younger operatives, not in how to fight, but in how to fold a handkerchief, how to listen longer than necessary, how to make someone feel indebted without ever asking a favor. His mentees are instructed to study parliamentary speeches, economic indexes, and classical poetry. He tells one of them, "If you don't know what a haiku means, how can you understand a coded threat?" The contradiction is clear and strangely beautiful. This is a man feared by governors, yet obsessed with the punctuality of Kyoto trains. A man who can silence a room with a breath, yet who bows lower than necessary to the elderly. Even his style reflects this duality. He never wears bold suits, always navy or charcoal, always tailored. No pinky rings, no sunglasses, just a perfectly ironed shirt and shoes you can see your reflection in. One small detail begins to circulate in whispers. He never wears cologne. When asked why, he once replied, "If your presence is noticed after you leave, then you wore too much." By now, some rivals begin to take note. There's unease, not because Watanabe is climbing the ranks, but because he's doing it without making enemies. In the underworld, that's unnatural, dangerous even. Enemies are proof you're playing the game. But Watanabe isn't playing, he's editing. The tension peaks one evening at a regional conference in Kyoto. A senior captain from another clan makes a snide remark about clerks pretending to lead warriors. The room stiffens. Watanabe finishes his tea, places the cup down, and stands. "Perhaps," he says, "we need fewer warriors." He walks out. The captain is found demoted a month later. No one knows by whom. His influence now reaches into legitimate businesses, construction, shipping, finance. He begins using clean money to secure dirtier favors. And still, he leaves no trail. A city council member once receives a box of persimmons and a note for the delays in autumn. The next day, a zoning law changes. This is how Watanabe begins to operate, not with direct threats, but through elegance so sharp it cuts before it's seen. A mainstream historical note here. Japan's rapid economic growth in the 1970s created a surge in gray zone industries, areas where legality blurred. Syndicates flourished in these cracks, especially those led by men who understood subtlety over spectacle. Watanabe was chief among them. Even within the syndicate, some wonder if he's planning something greater, maybe even restructuring the very notion of what a Yakuza organization can be. But he never says. He just nods. And Japan keeps shifting. By the time the 1980s glide into Japan like a sleek new train, pulling into an impeccably timed station, Watanabe has become a name you don't say loudly, not out of fear, but out of etiquette. His is a presence that doesn't loom. It lingers, like the warmth left behind by a departed guest, or the slight weight of a memory you didn't know you were holding. He is now fully embedded in the upper echelons of the Yamaguchi-gumi, no longer just an internal coordinator or quiet fixer. Officially, his title reads like any bureaucratic label. But among the lieutenants, the ones who dress like accountants and speak like monks, he's referred to only as the one with the teacup. Even within an organization known for its rigid hierarchy and formalism, Watanabe's authority flows differently. He doesn't climb the ladder by pushing others down. Instead, the ladder seems to lower itself toward him. Promotions are whispered, not announced. His influence extends across prefectures without ever needing his physical presence. Sometimes just a phone call from a man who says, "Watanabe-san is aware," is enough to shift entire routes of money, men, or memory. His quiet is now institutional. The economic climate of Japan during this time is one of feverish wealth. The bubble era swells to absurd proportions. Land in Tokyo becomes worth more per square meter than all of California. Stocks soar. Luxury explodes. Everyone is rushing. Everyone is loud. Everyone except him. Watanabe treats the bubble like a parade he politely watches from the sidewalk. He doesn't gamble on wild investments. He doesn't push into markets he doesn't understand. Instead, he consolidates. He cleans. He trims inefficiencies and dead weight from the Yamaguchi-gumi's vast limbs. He turns down bribes that come too easily and dissolves ventures that operate too noisily. One by one, The old guard bosses either retire or stumble. And Watanabe? He's still just sipping tea and asking gentle questions like, why do we need 3 trucking fronts in the same block? There's a pivotal moment here, one many historians still point to. In 1982, a shipment of gambling machines goes missing between Nagoya and Osaka. Several fingers point toward an ambitious lieutenant trying to build his own faction. Everyone expects retaliation. Guns, knives, a clear warning. Instead, Watanabe schedules a lunch. They meet in a neutral restaurant. The accused man sits across from Watanabe, heart thudding so hard it could bruise bone. But Watanabe doesn't raise his voice. He pours tea, offers pickled vegetables, and halfway through the meal says only, when people eat too fast, they forget the taste. The machines are returned by sundown. The lieutenant steps down 2 weeks later, voluntarily. When asked what was said during the meeting, the man simply replies, "He made me remember my own shame." Mainstream observers have long struggled to define this approach. Is it manipulation? Is it moral authority? Many people still think that Watanabe wasn't a boss at all, but a kind of secular priest, turning power into ritual. So what do you think? Can influence last longer if it never needs to declare itself? Behind closed doors, he begins restructuring the Yamaguchi-gumi like a business school case study. He implements internal audits, staff evaluations, efficiency metrics. Territory disputes are now mediated with maps, market trends, and tone analysis. He begins formalizing mentorship. Younger operatives are paired with veterans in structured, measured ways. There are reports now, discrete ones, that include psychological profiles and risk forecasts. One former enforcer jokes, "We were becoming less Yakuza and more Swiss," and yet none of it feels artificial. Because Watanabe doesn't just demand professionalism, he embodies it. Every gesture, every pause, every refusal to engage in meaningless ceremony, it all adds up. At a conference in Kobe, where dozens of regional captains gather to discuss a possible expansion into foreign markets, Watanabe listens for 2 hours without saying a word. Then, when asked his opinion, he quietly replies, "If our foundation isn't stable, why should we decorate the roof?" No one moves forward with the plan. There's another detail that emerges around this time, one that becomes legend. Watanabe begins using a small black notebook, different from the blank one he's always carried. This one has tabs, color-coded. Those who've seen it describe neat kanji, elegant diagrams, and long lists without labels. One entry, it said, simply reads, "Does he pause before he lies?" People stopped lying to him after that. It's during the same decade that his influence reaches international ears. Interpol begins to track certain Yakuza networks. American intelligence circles note an unusually well-organized Japanese syndicate that seems less chaotic than others. And always, Watanabe's name floats near the surface, like a fish you're sure you just saw, but can't quite net. But he doesn't travel, doesn't give interviews, doesn't leave much of a trace. Instead, he walks, in the mornings, in Kobe, along streets lined with vending machines and aging stone walls. Sometimes he pauses in front of bookstores but never enters. A newspaper vendor once tried to give him a free paper. Watanabe declined, saying, "Information without effort becomes noise." He's not above tradition either. Every December, he sends rice cakes to a list of elderly retirees from the organization. Not branded, not flashy, just quietly delivered before New Year's, with a note, "For what you've already done." That year, the list includes a man who once betrayed him. People ask why. Watanabe simply says, Even mistakes can age into gratitude, a historical note worth mentioning. In Japan's bubble era, while many criminal organizations expanded recklessly into banking, foreign trade, and nightlife industries, the Yamaguchi-gumi under Watanabe grew more slowly, but more solidly. Fewer headlines, far fewer arrests. He's not afraid of ambition, he's just better at pacing it. By the late 80s, his name is more than a whisper. It's a presence, a structure. You don't refer to Watanabe's crew. You refer to his influence. It's ambient. Even rivals begin adopting some of his methods. Less violence, more structure. But there's one thing they can't copy. His restraint. And that's what makes him dangerous. The sun hasn't yet risen over Kobe when Watanabe ties his tie. Always the same tight Windsor knot. Always mirror-checked. Never touched twice. It's the early 1990s, and Japan is bracing for what few are ready to say aloud. The collapse of its bubble. Stocks waver. Property values twitch. Banks whisper among themselves. And behind a frosted office door, Watanabe clicks his pen once, then sets it down. He already knows. For most, the burst is panic. For Watanabe, it's just gravity asserting itself. The Yamaguchi-gumi, now Japan's most formidable crime syndicate, has grown massive under a quiet architecture of discipline. Watanabe, at this point, is widely seen as the heir apparent, though no formal announcement has been made. Yet even the air around him suggests inevitability, and then, with the death of his predecessor, Masahisa Takanaka, Watanabe formally steps into the role of kumicho, the top boss. But not with ceremony, not with fanfare. Just a quiet morning meeting, a bowed head, and a signature on a page that no one ever sees. He becomes the fifth kumicho of the Yamaguchi-gumi, and the mood of the organization doesn't erupt. It lowers its voice. He assumes the position like a man accepting an umbrella in the rain, practical, expected, and without sentiment. At his inauguration, which is more like a silent chess move than a coronation, he says only, "There is no need to clap. Let's begin." Many people still think that moment marked the beginning of a new era, not just for the Yamaguchi-gumi, but for how the underworld could operate in Japan. So, what do you think? Can an empire shift without a tremor, simply because the man at the center doesn't move? Almost immediately, Watanabe begins streamlining. His first targets? Wastefulness and noise. Units known for flashy behavior, nightclubs, sports cars, unnecessary displays of wealth, are quietly reassigned. Several mid-level bosses who fancied themselves celebrities find their offices relocated to administrative support roles in more remote prefectures. No demotion on paper. But the message is clear. One such figure, a lieutenant with a taste for champagne and headlines, is found managing a fleet of vending machines in Hokkaido. When asked how it happened, he sighs. Watanabe doesn't fire you. He makes you irrelevant. He then turns inward, tightening command lines, rewriting procedures, and even introducing rotation schedules for meetings to minimize surveillance risk. No two lieutenants meet more than twice in the same order. No names are written. No calls are repeated. It's not paranoia. It's rhythm. Efficiency dressed in silence. Even the HQ changes. The Kobe headquarters, once a traditional building steeped in dark woods and heavier symbolism, gets a subtle facelift. Nothing flashy, but suddenly the floors are shinier, the teacups match, and the receptionist never forgets a name. A Tokyo-based journalist once attempted to walk past the front gate. He described the experience later as feeling observed by the air itself. No one stopped him. but no one had to. There's something surgical in how Watanabe moves now. A shipment of illicit goods is intercepted in Fukuoka. He dissolves the entire supply chain within 2 weeks, without arrests, without reprisals. Just empty offices and unanswered phones, a loan shark skimming too deeply. His books are seized and returned with a note tucked inside. Precision is a kind of loyalty. These are not gangster moves in the traditional sense. These are corporate audits disguised as moral corrections. In the public eye, Watanabe remains a ghost. Occasionally photographed, always suited, always mid-step, never smiling, never out of place. Reporters call him the boss who doesn't blink. Government officials refuse to comment on him altogether. One former National Police Agency officer said he was the safest man to never make a mistake. But of course, mistakes still happen. A young operative under Watanabe's chain of command is caught on tape discussing a weapons deal. The case goes public. Media flurry. Politicians panic. Watanabe's response? He says nothing. Makes no comment. Cancels no appearances. He simply sends a condolence wreath to the police department, with no card. Within a month, the investigation quietly concludes. Charges are dropped. The young operative disappears, reportedly now working in a tofu shop in Okinawa. Scholars debate this event endlessly. Was it a power play? A peace offering? Or just Watanabe reminding everyone that silence, when composed correctly, is louder than fury? He begins enforcing what some call the Code of Iron Silence, a doctrine of absolute discretion. His men are instructed to avoid unnecessary words. Meetings are limited to minutes. Cell phones are discouraged. Instead, pocket watches make a curious return among his circle. When asked, one captain jokes, "A watch doesn't record your voice." The structure of the Yamaguchi-gumi under Watanabe starts to resemble something strange, neither purely criminal nor corporate, more like a sovereign body, a nation without borders, organized, stoic, balanced. His reputation grows internationally. Law enforcement agencies in the US, South Korea, and even Australia begin tracking his networks, but they keep running into the same problem. He leaves no digital trail, no signature, no voice recordings. Interpol refers to him as a statistical presence. Back in Japan, though, he is anything but abstract. Real estate companies begin quietly verifying deals through intermediaries linked to him. Certain judges recuse themselves from cases involving his name. And in Kobe, local restaurants begin placing an extra set of chopsticks at back tables, just in case. He doesn't visit these places often, but the possibility is enough. Still, Watanabe doesn't indulge in fear. He doesn't build palaces, doesn't surround himself with bodyguards or gold trinkets. His office remains unadorned. One bonsai, one ink brush, and a calendar turned always to the next month. A former subordinate once said, he lived 5 seconds ahead of the present. That's where his power came from. And in this newly official role, Watanabe does what he's always done best. Organize, simplify, remove the unnecessary. He begins a campaign within the Yamaguchi-gumi that's unprecedented: literacy. Members who can't read or write are given tutors. Books circulate. Quiet competitions are held. Who can recite a poem by Basho? Who knows the GDP of Taiwan? Who understands corporate mergers? It's not image building. It's armor. The more refined the mind, the less detectable the crime. And above all, Watanabe keeps a strict rule for himself. Never raise your voice. Never repeat a command. If you had to say it twice, you said it to the wrong person. Kobe is waking. Trains hum to life. Merchants lift their shutters. and vending machines whir into standby with a glow like low embers. Somewhere on a quiet street, Watanabe is already seated. A porcelain cup rests beneath his fingers. It's tea, as always, never coffee. The morning paper remains folded beside him, untouched. He doesn't need headlines to know what's shifting. He can already feel it in the air, in the posture of the men who greet him, because something has shifted. Watanabe has taken full control, but not just of the Yamaguchi-gumi. He's redefining what it means to lead from within Japan's most powerful and scrutinized criminal organization. The country is reeling from the economic collapse. The bubble has well and truly burst. Office towers echo with layoffs, banks freeze accounts, and entire families lose fortunes overnight. Panic spreads across the nation like a low-grade fever, and in the midst of this, Watanabe doesn't flinch, doesn't retreat. He leans into the crisis. Where others see downfall, he sees vacuum. For years, legitimate institutions have leaned on underworld logistics when things get tight. Warehousing, transportation, informal financing. But now, with the economy in free fall, those connections begin to fray. Watanabe doesn't mind. He lets the chaos bloom for a bit, watches who stumbles, and then he sends rice, literally. In the winter of 1995, when the great Hanshin earthquake devastates Kobe, the government is sluggish in response. Infrastructure collapses. People sleep in parks. Emergency supplies are slow. And before the Prime Minister even finishes his first televised statement, trucks arrive in the devastated zones. They're not marked as government aid. They belong to the Yamaguchi-gumi. Food, blankets, bottled water, sanitary supplies, delivered with eerie precision. Watanabe doesn't make a speech, doesn't hold a press conference. He just acts, quietly, effectively. His men help clear roads, erect temporary shelters, and distribute aid faster than official responders. One local woman, later interviewed, said, "We didn't ask where the help came from. It came. That's all." A photograph circulates. Watanabe in a black coat standing beside crates of supplies, hands behind his back. No smile, no badge. Just presence. Mainstream historians still debate this moment. Was it a calculated PR move? A genuine expression of civic duty? Many people still think that Watanabe saw this as something more elemental. A demonstration that control, real control, doesn't come from a vote or a badge, but from timing and precision. So what do you think? Can an act be moral if its motive is strategic? The public reaction is mixed, but undeniably reverent. For the first time, newspapers hint at a strange truth. The man behind the most feared organization in Japan might also be among its most competent leaders, and Watanabe doesn't capitalize on the goodwill. He doesn't ride the wave. He simply files it away and returns to work. Internally, his actions during the quake become legend. He organizes shifts for volunteers, implements logistics reroutes, even allows, temporarily, members to reveal their affiliations when offering aid. It's the only known instance during his leadership where branding was permitted, and only for 72 hours. After that, it's back to shadows, but something else happens during the earthquake aftermath. Something subtle, but monumental. The police begin to hesitate. Previously, enforcement efforts against the Yamaguchi-gumi followed a predictable rhythm. Raids, surveillance, asset freezes. But now, with Watanabe commanding both fear and a strange form of respect, that rhythm falters. Prosecutors grow cautious. Judges cite lack of clear evidence more frequently. And bureaucrats begin asking, behind closed doors, what would happen if he weren't there to keep order? In response, Watanabe increases transparency, not in the legal sense, of course, but internally. He distributes updated handbooks to his lieutenants, details procedures for handling press inquiries, law enforcement encounters, even retirement benefits. He's not running a gang anymore. He's running a parallel institution. One night, during a private dinner with 3 top lieutenants, Watanabe is said to have spoken a full paragraph, a rare luxury. We are not just managing risk, we are managing rhythm. If the rhythm breaks, the nation shakes. Remember that. From then on, the word rhythm becomes an internal keyword, used in reports, whispered in strategy meetings, embedded in metaphors. Rhythm means order. Rhythm means compliance. Rhythm means don't let him down. Around this time, a high-ranking official in Tokyo is quietly photographed, leaving a restaurant rumored to be owned by a Yamaguchi shell company. The media speculates. The official denies. But the restaurant is closed within 24 hours. The chef transferred. No comment ever issued. And from Kobe, silence. Watanabe is also quietly revolutionizing personnel management. Instead of rewarding violence or bravado, he promotes based on discretion, loyalty, and cognitive skill. He introduces psychological evaluations, not formal ones, but observed ones. How does a man respond when the tea is served late? When his phone rings during silence? When a lie is presented as a favor? Those who pass become his next tier. Those who fail aren't punished, just removed, sent to lesser roles in remote territories, or offered early retirement. There's a story that surfaces about a promising young enforcer named Nakata, quick, ambitious, and sharp. But one evening, during a formal gathering, Nakata jokes about a government minister. It gets a laugh. Watanabe doesn't laugh. The next week, Nakata is offered a real estate management position in a rural town 4 hours from Kobe. He accepts. When asked years later what went wrong, Nakata replies, "The joke was fine. The timing wasn't." That's how precise the machine has become. Even rival syndicates begin adjusting their behavior. Several smaller organizations start mimicking Watanabe's practices: discipline, formal dress, internal manuals. One boss even introduces monthly reports modeled after those believed to circulate in Kobe. The media calls it the Watanabe effect. But of course he never comments. He's not seen reacting to this influence. Not even once. His public appearances are rare and wordless. When photographed, his eyes are usually lowered, as though reading something invisible just past the lens. Still, the pressure mounts. International agencies grow louder. Japan's government is pressured by the US to crack down harder. The National Police Agency issues a formal statement naming the Yamaguchi-gumi as a national threat. Watanabe's response? He adjusts the placement of a paperweight on his desk. Nothing else. Because by now, even pressure has rhythm, and he's the one conducting the orchestra. In Tokyo, suits gather in rooms with too much air conditioning and too little context, asking how one man could seem so untouchable. His name appears in memos, intelligence briefings, and off-the-record whispers. But still, no one can pin him down. Not because he hides, but because he's so visible, just ungraspable. Yoshinori Watanabe doesn't dodge the spotlight. He walks around it. And when people look, they see only what he allows. Meanwhile, back in Kobe, his presence is as structured as ever. He arrives at the office at exactly 8:12 a.m. Never early, never late. His chair faces east. His calendar is handwritten, inked neatly with no cross-outs. His personal assistant knows that if the blinds are pulled halfway, no one is to disturb him, not even for emergencies. That's when he's thinking, or remembering. or deciding something that will quietly alter 10 lives before lunch. Internally, his leadership is solidifying into something more than feared. It's admired, not with affection, but with the solemn reverence you'd give to an ancient sword. Under Watanabe, the Yamaguchi-gumi becomes less of an organization and more of a climate. Men entering its inner ranks begin speaking differently, slower, more precise. Politeness, Watanabe once murmured, is a form of architecture. One of his first major moves as full kumicho involves formalizing international liaisons, not through explicit deals, but through understandings. He never signs anything, never speaks in direct terms. But soon, cargo routes once plagued with theft become smooth. Customs inspections grow less frequent. Border authorities in Southeast Asia begin recognizing certain handshakes. Interpol suspects, but cannot prove, a widening network. FBI analysts note a steep drop in internal violence among Japanese criminal factions, interpreting it as unnatural peace. Some theorize a deal, others a threat. But most simply admit, we don't know how he does it, because Watanabe doesn't do it loudly. He does it like fog does erosion, slowly, invisibly, reshaping everything before anyone notices. In 1997, he initiates what becomes internally known as the white gloves period, a soft mandate, never formalized, that encourages top members to project restraint. Expensive watches are discouraged, loud cars quietly traded in. Tattoos, while never banned, are now expected to be covered, always. Public behavior becomes part of internal evaluations. A single incident at a nightclub can delay your career by 5 years, maybe more. This isn't moralism, it's branding. Watanabe doesn't want fear, he wants inevitability. The result? A strange new cultural tone in the underworld. Syndicate meetings resemble academic boards more than gang summits. Men bring notebooks. References are made to financial indexes, trade tariffs, even currency fluctuations. Watanabe, for his part, maintains silence during these gatherings. He listens with the intensity of a man timing rainfall. And then, when necessary, speaks one line. Not a summary, just the needed angle. During a long debate over territory logistics between Osaka and Nagoya, a dozen men argue for over an hour. Finally, Watanabe says, "A delay in Nagoya delays Osaka, so the delay is Osaka's fault." Discussion ends. Problem solved. No one dares to question the logic, not because it's flawless, but because he said it. A historical note worth mentioning. By the late 1990s, the Japanese government passes the anti-Boryakuden law, aiming to curb the influence of organized crime. Under this law, police are granted expanded powers to restrict gang activities. Most organizations panic. Watanabe does not. Instead, he restructures again. He begins decoupling traditional Yakuza fronts from official family rosters. Business entities are rebranded under legal firms, staffed with civilians. Money flows are insulated by layers of corporate legitimacy. What once would have been handled by an enforcer is now discussed by an attorney over a perfectly legal lunch. Watanabe's hands? Never visible? There's a scene retold among his inner circle from this time. A mid-ranking boss approaches him, concerned about the new legislation. "Will we have to change everything?" he asks. Watanabe pours tea. "Only what's visible," and that becomes a motto of sorts. Only what's visible. Offices begin rotating addresses every quarter. Meeting locations are never repeated. A network of vetted intermediaries is built. Not members, not employees, but participants. Useful, distant, disposable. One retired logistics manager, interviewed under anonymity, said, "I worked for him for 8 years. I don't know if I ever actually met him, but I knew the color of his umbrella. Even rivals are stunned by the transformation." Traditionalist bosses complain privately that Watanabe's world feels too clean. But they stop complaining when their own members defect quietly, drawn to the structure, the safety, the future, because that's what Watanabe sells, future. He begins training new members in conflict de-escalation. Actual seminars are held, not in dojos, but in quiet hotel conference rooms. Topics include negotiation, federal legal boundaries, and loss prevention. At one such seminar, a guest speaker, a university professor, mistakenly refers to the Yamaguchi-gumi as a criminal entity. Watanabe, seated silently in the back, raises one eyebrow. The professor pauses, apologizes, adjusts the phrase to historically significant organization. Everyone takes notes, but Watanabe's control isn't limited to the interior. He's watching the press now, studying it, not reacting, but absorbing. In a rare move, he hosts a private off-the-record meeting with a well-known journalist under the condition that nothing be published for 10 years. The journalist agrees. Later, when asked what was discussed, he says only, "I thought I was the one interviewing him, but I left with more questions about myself." Many people still think that Watanabe understood something deeper, that power isn't in being seen or even obeyed, but in being referenced. So what do you think? If someone shapes how others interpret silence, are they still silent? And in all of this, Watanabe never once changes his tempo. He still drinks the same tea, still walks the same early route along the edge of Kobe Bay, still corrects the placement of a teacup if the handle doesn't face east, still folds the corner of his calendar every Sunday, and at night, in an office emptied of noise, he still sits behind a single bonsai and thinks and waits, because rhythm, as he said before, isn't noise, it's memory. A stiff breeze moves across Kobe Bay, but the man standing at the overlook doesn't adjust his collar. Watanabe lets the wind do what it does. Move, pass, vanish. He's been standing at that same vantage point every Sunday evening for years now. Always alone, always quiet. It's not for meditation or grief. It's for measurement, not of tides or weather, but of stillness. By the late 1990s, Japan is no longer in denial about the economic slump. Recession is the official term. Words like downsizing, stagnation, and reform are plastered across headlines. But inside the Yamaguchi-gumi, things seem strangely stable, orderly, efficient. Because Watanabe has anticipated all of it, months in advance, he begins what insiders call the Black Mirror audits. Internal performance reviews that compare not just earnings and compliance, but behavior. One senior lieutenant is reassigned because he stares too long at his own reflection in a shop window. Another receives a private reprimand for showing impatience with an elderly waitress. None of this is arbitrary. To Watanabe, posture and patience are predictive. The moment a man forgets his own rhythm, he becomes unpredictable and therefore dangerous. He also introduces a curious new standard: ambient surveillance, not of others, of oneself. Members are encouraged to begin evaluating their own behavior as if watched. Watanabe even provides a list of reflection questions in an internal memo. Cryptic? Yes, but memorized by heart. Did you arrive before your absence was noticed? Did your silence sharpen the room or dull it? Would your enemies misquote you or forget you? There is no follow-up, no scoring, just the expectation that you know the answers. Mainstream historians have struggled to define this philosophy. Some see it as discipline elevated to dogma, Others see it as Watanabe's form of control through self-ghosting, making men so internally regulated they no longer require external correction. Many people still think that this method allowed the syndicate to survive longer than any law ever anticipated. So what do you think? If you train people to monitor themselves more closely than any authority could, have you created peace or paralysis? Externally, Watanabe continues the great muting of public exposure. His lieutenants are less visible. His network of shell companies grows deeper, more recursive. Subsidiaries of subsidiaries begin buying up small real estate firms and logistics outfits, all fully legal. The connections are too abstract for even determined prosecutors to trace with certainty. Yet the money flows, steady, immaculate. An auditor from Tokyo investigating a suspicious real estate transaction involving 10 linked entities is said to have remarked, "Every door led to a mirror. Inside Yamaguchi HQ, the atmosphere resembles that of an elite private bank more than anything else. Visitors are expected to dress modestly, speak quietly, and bow lower than they think necessary. A security detail, unarmed but watchful, operates like hotel concierge, helpful, polite, and never needed twice. On the third floor, Watanabe holds court, but never in a grand room. His office is austere. The desk is simple oak. No photographs, no paperweight. One teacup, one bonsai, and the infamous black notebook, now slightly worn at the corners. His meetings are brief, always under 12 minutes. He doesn't waste breath. A visiting lawyer once made the mistake of joking about how corporate things had become. Watanabe looked up from his tea and said, "Then let's ensure the shareholders are pleased." That lawyer reportedly stopped laughing for the rest of the year. But Watanabe's system isn't just about efficiency. It's about erasing friction. He initiates soft retirements for aging members, graceful exits, generous pensions, and a culture of legacy preservation. No one is forced out. They are simply reminded that stillness is also service. Many accept, some resist, but no one is humiliated. In return, Watanabe gets something rare in organized crime: smooth succession lines. In 1998, a power vacuum threatens to form in Kyushu. A rival clan's leader dies unexpectedly, and underlings begin vying for control. Fears of open violence rise, but Watanabe sends 2 men, neither of them overtly powerful, armed only with envelopes, respect, and an invitation. Within a week, the conflict dissipates. No one knows what was offered. No one ever says, but one of the underlings soon retires to a countryside home, his debts mysteriously settled. That year, Watanabe is asked in a closed-room session what he values most in leadership. He replies with 3 words: control without correction. This becomes another internal phrase, CC for short. Lieutenants begin using it as shorthand in reports and conversation. Did the new protocol roll out smoothly? Yes, full CC. Meanwhile, international pressure continues to mount. The US and Japanese governments begin exploring stricter financial tracing measures. Anti-money laundering laws intensify. Banks are instructed to flag suspicious activity, so Watanabe simply adjusts his cadence again. Now, transactions happen through a blend of ultra-traditional and ultra-modern methods. He employs currency exchange houses that operate on handshake systems passed down through generations, combined with encrypted ledgers stored across multiple locations. And still, nothing ties to him. He travels rarely. When he does, it's without fanfare. A single sedan, no escort. In one famous instance, he attends a tea ceremony in Kyoto hosted by an elderly calligraphy master. The only clue of his presence? A cup, untouched longer than any other. That master's son later said, "He didn't drink the tea. He he studied its patience. Inside the Yamaguchi-gumi, the atmosphere has changed. Younger members now revere discretion more than dominance. A generation raised on headlines and action films begins dressing conservatively, quoting poetry, and speaking in aphorisms. Watanabe doesn't instruct this directly. He simply models it. He begins mentoring two potential successors, not by grooming them with power, but by burdening them with observation. They are instructed to sit in on meetings, but never speak, to analyze mistakes, but never offer solutions aloud, only write their thoughts and submit them weekly. One of them, reportedly, turns in a blank sheet 3 weeks in a row. Watanabe finally comments, "You've started listening." And yet, with all this control, there remains an eerie calm about him. He is never hurried, never visibly stressed. When a senior accountant dies suddenly, taking with him critical passcodes and financial access, Watanabe merely says, "Then we rebuild from memory." And they do. A historical aside. The late 1990s and early 2000s saw a tightening net around organized crime in Japan, with increased legal pressure and heightened media scrutiny. But the Yamaguchi-gumi under Watanabe not only survived, it streamlined. Laws forced transparency. Watanabe created opacity through elegance, because when the room is full of mirrors, even the brightest flashlight reflects only itself. The turn of the millennium arrives with fireworks over Tokyo Bay and hesitant optimism in government offices. Japan is still nursing the bruises of economic stagnation, but tech stocks flicker with promise, and a new generation begins to believe in digital futures. Yet in Kobe, inside a building without signs, where blinds are always half drawn, Watanabe's rhythm doesn't skip a beat. He greets the year 2000 exactly as he did 1999, sipping tea at dawn, reviewing a single sheet of handwritten notes, and setting the page aflame once memorized. No ceremony, no celebration, just continuity. Internally, he initiates a quiet campaign, the digitization of silence. He instructs a select team, coders, lawyers, former bankers, to modernize certain administrative practices, but with conditions: no emails, no cloud storage, everything encrypted, everything air-gapped, every digital record matched with an analog duplicate, handwritten in neat kanji, filed in locked drawers accessible only to those who never ask for access. It's a paradox, but under Watanabe, paradoxes are policies. He tells his men, "Use modern tools, but only in ancient ways." The syndicate adapts. Young members are now required to study basic cybersecurity, banking regulation, and encryption theory. But alongside that, they are tested on patience. Not formally, just observed. One story goes, a recruit is told to sit in a room with a full meal set before him and wait for a signal to eat. The signal never comes. After 2 hours, he leaves. He is not contacted again. Many people still think that Watanabe didn't test loyalty with risk, but with delay. So what do you think? Is restraint a more accurate measure of power than aggression? By now, even police officials speak his name only in context of legacy. They know that catching him isn't just unlikely, it's strategically unsound. His removal could create chaos. He's not just the center of his empire, he's the structure holding it up. Even so, the media tries. A documentary airs on national television, tracing his ascent, interviewing former enforcers, speculating wildly about offshore accounts and secret properties. The program ends with a blurred photo of Watanabe walking through a Kyoto alley, alone, umbrella lowered. The narrator calls him the ghost banker of Kobe. Watanabe does not respond publicly, but a week later, the production company receives an unmarked envelope containing a single haiku, handwritten. The storm studied me. It asked no questions, just passed. Umbrellas remain. The envelope is unsigned, but the handwriting is unmistakable. This cryptic correspondence becomes infamous, passed around journalism circles like folklore. Eventually, it's framed on the office wall of the lead producer, and to this day, no one truly understands whether it was a warning, a dismissal, or something else entirely. Inside the syndicate, the haiku becomes a kind of scripture. Some start calling him kumicho no kaze, the wind boss, and perhaps that's the point. He's no longer a man in charge of an organization. He is the atmosphere it breathes. He implements a policy in early 2001. 3 degrees of distance. Every operational decision must pass through at least 3 unrelated hands before reaching the source. This frustrates external investigators and even some internal members. But the results speak for themselves. No arrests, no exposure, no leaks. By the second quarter of that year, Watanabe begins phasing out traditional revenue streams. Gambling dens are downsized, loan sharking reduced, nightlife holdings sold or gifted to newer organizations. Instead, he focuses on logistics, security services, international shell firms, and a strange new frontier, digital consulting. On paper, at least. In truth, these entities function as buffers, absorbing heat, providing cover, and occasionally offering plausible deniability for transactions that can't be traced. He reportedly says at a strategy meeting, crime is no longer about hiding. It's about being mistaken for something else. And perhaps nothing embodies this more than the redesign of Yamaguchi-gumi's internal architecture. He introduces titles like compliance coordinator and infrastructure liaison. No one really knows what they do. That's the point. What matters is that on paper, the syndicate now resembles a holding company more than a criminal enterprise. Still, he doesn't soften completely. One man, a regional boss from Sendai, starts pushing for looser rules, says the organization is becoming too delicate, starts courting foreign investors a little too publicly. Watanabe doesn't retaliate. He doesn't speak. He simply stops sending updates to that man's office. Within weeks, vendors stop answering calls. Shipments go missing. Clients vanish. The Sendai boss steps down citing health reasons, moves to a seaside town, opens a bookstore. That's how Watanabe disciplines now. Not through violence, but vacuum. A mainstream historical fact worth mentioning. By the early 2000s, the number of reported violent incidents linked to the Yamaguchi-gumi drops dramatically, even as its financial footprint expands. Analysts are baffled. Some attribute this to changes in law enforcement. But those on the inside know. This is the Watanabe model in full bloom. One younger member writes in a personal journal, "We are no longer wolves. We are the weather." But even the weather leaves clues. In mid-2002, a photograph surfaces in an art gallery in Kobe. A street scene, blurry, grayscale. Nothing obvious. But in the background, a familiar figure leans against a lamppost. Not posing. Just pausing. It's Watanabe. Visitors begin interpreting the photo, what his posture meant, the tilt of his head, the placement of his shoes. One artist calls it Japan's last composed silence. The gallery sells the photo to a private buyer for an undisclosed amount. The artist never hears from Watanabe. But the gallery does receive a box of calligraphy brushes, handmade, unsigned, wrapped in a cloth bearing a stitched character, kai, meaning intent, or more loosely, breath. By now, his mystique is impenetrable. His influence is systemic, and his control still absolute. And still, every morning at 8:12, he arrives. Every Sunday, he walks alone. And every time the wind passes through Kobe, someone glances over their shoulder, not expecting to see him, but wondering if he already passed. A slight drizzle falls over Kobe's narrow alleys. Not enough for umbrellas, just enough to make the streetlights shimmer. Somewhere near the port, Watanabe walks alone with no bodyguard, no entourage, no briefcase. His shoes leave no splash. His silhouette brushes past glass doors and forgotten vending machines, seen only by steam rising from a ramen stall and a cat that doesn't flinch. It's 2003, and if anyone expected age to slow him, they haven't been watching closely. Watanabe's stride remains steady, his gaze intact, his silence more potent now than ever. Not because it's mysterious, but because it has become the language everyone else is learning to speak. The Yamaguchi-gumi is now an empire of minimalism, a sprawling organism with a bureaucrat's soul. Its branches extend through logistics firms, security contractors, and quasi-legal consulting operations. But its heart remains unchanged. Every move still begins with a pause. Every directive still lands without punctuation. Internally, Watanabe launches what becomes known as the thinning. It's not a purge, not a crackdown, just a reassignment of value. Men who no longer adapt are gently moved aside. Those who lean too loud, too fast, too nostalgic for a more brutal past, find themselves transferred, reassigned, or placed into quiet retirement with full honors and zero input. One such man, known only as Mori-san, is said to have asked during his exit meeting, "What happens if I say no?" Watanabe didn't blink. Then nothing happens. That's what changes. And it does. The thinning affects nearly 30 officers across 6 prefectures. No protests, no visible demotions, just a shift in airspace. Their absence isn't loud, it's simply more room to breathe. At the same time, he begins grooming administrative personnel with no criminal history. Young lawyers, accountants, even academics begin finding employment under the Yamaguchi umbrella, often unaware of the organization's deeper roots. These are the new shields, the institutional face of Watanabe's future-proofing. He's not hiding the past, he's reframing it. And like a master calligrapher, he knows how to let the ink bleed just enough to imply the rest. In a rare meeting with top regional lieutenants, Watanabe delivers a short message. Respect is not given, it is anticipated. The room stays silent for a full minute afterward, unsure whether to respond or just memorize the phrasing. Most choose the latter, but beneath the calm surface, tension is building. Externally, the Japanese government tightens anti-gang legislation. New ordinances allow local authorities to restrict syndicate members from renting apartments, opening bank accounts, or even entering public parks. Posters warning against Boryokuden behavior begin appearing near schools and convenience stores. Public sentiment shifts. Protesters gather near known Yamaguchi holdings. For the first time in decades, graffiti begins appearing. "No more silent kings," scrawled near Kobe Station. Watanabe does not react. He instructs no retaliation, issues no denials. He simply adjusts. He introduces Contact Protocol Delta, a series of guidelines that reshape how members interact with the public. Smiling is now encouraged, compliments expected. If police approach, you respond with calm and curiosity. Members are instructed to carry clean ID, wear suits in muted tones, and always know the name of the shopkeeper nearest to them. One lieutenant jokes that Watanabe has turned the Yamaguchi-gumi into the world's most polite rumor, a mainstream historical fact. By 2004, over half of all prefectures in Japan had enacted local ordinances restricting gang activity and discouraging association with known members. Traditional methods of operation, coercion, physical threats, visible intimidation, became more legally hazardous than profitable. Watanabe saw it coming years before. That's why his system doesn't resist the wave. It flows under it. And while the outside world shifts with rising tech, cultural change, and economic uncertainty, inside the syndicate, Watanabe becomes almost mythic. There's a story, told in whispers, about a young courier who delivers a misaddressed envelope to Watanabe's personal office. The contents? Irrelevant. The error? Minor. But when the courier bows to apologize, Watanabe simply says, "It's good that you knew." The courier is promoted 6 months later. From then on, "It's good that you knew" becomes a kind of mantra inside HQ, a soft nod to the value of awareness, of initiative, of quiet correction before loud mistakes. Another change. Watanabe begins holding more one-on-one meetings, always brief, always after dark. The rooms are plain, the furniture functional. Tea is always served, but rarely drunk. His questions are never about performance, always about rhythm. How do you spend your off hours? What does silence mean to you? What would you do if given one less instruction tomorrow? These are not interviews. They are calibration sessions. And like everything Watanabe touches, they are recorded nowhere. Not even in memory, at least not by those wise enough to survive. Many people still think that by 2005, Watanabe had built not an organization, but a doctrine, one that didn't need him to be enforced. So what do you think? If a leader steps back and nothing collapses, is that mastery or just prelude to the fade? His lieutenants don't know. They only bow lower. In Kobe, small changes accumulate. Meetings grow shorter. Decisions arrive with less discussion. The office bonsai is replaced. The clock in the hallway now ticks audibly. Subtle signals, perhaps. But those who understand the rhythm start to wonder, is Watanabe preparing for something? Or perhaps preparing not to be here? Still, his daily rituals continue. The morning tea, the blank page. The shoes shined so thoroughly they reflect light from the street lamp as he walks alone. Even now, even in his 60s, because no matter how high he's climbed, how vast the shadow he's cast, he still knows how to walk quietly, how to pass a threshold without echo. And the men behind him? They're listening, not for orders, for absence. By 2006, there's something eerily symmetrical about Watanabe's world. Each piece of his life, each decision, gesture, and correction feels placed not just with intention, but with echo, as though every move he makes has already happened once before, in some quieter draft of time. He's nearing 70 now. His steps are slower, yes, but not weakened, just deliberate. The kind of pace that turns corridors into ceremony. Inside Yamaguchi-gumi HQ, younger members clear hallways seconds before he arrives, not by order, but by instinct. Some call it respect. Others say it's gravity, and like gravity, Watanabe no longer needs to declare anything. His silence is a constant. His presence, an equation no one dares solve. Still, Japan outside his walls continues to harden. The government passes sweeping, organized crime exclusion laws, prohibiting businesses from any association, even indirect, with known syndicate members. Landlords are fined. Vendors are shut down. Families of members face discrimination in housing and employment. It's an all-out legal siege. And Watanabe? He prepares tea. But behind the scenes he responds, not with confrontation, but with calibration. The Yamaguchi-gumi undergoes its most dramatic reorganization yet. Fronts are dissolved, assets sold, Legal corporations sever all ambiguous ties. Shell companies become cleaner, sharper, less traceable. Investments shift toward middlemen with spotless records and faces no one remembers. Entire branches of the syndicate disappear overnight, reabsorbed, repurposed, or buried under paperwork. He calls it the Iron Veil, not because it hides, but because it filters. What remains must be tempered, precise, unbendable. He also updates internal documents, though documents is a generous term. His so-called manuals are less instruction and more philosophy. One entry reads, "When wind meets water, neither apologizes." Another, "If you remove one unnecessary sentence from your life each week, you will be unreadable by enemies within 5 years. They're copied by hand, passed between captains. None are signed, but everyone knows." There's another curious shift. Watanabe begins giving gifts, not lavish ones, not even consistent, but small, specific tokens. A fountain pen here, a first edition novel there, a box of herbal tea sent anonymously to a regional enforcer recovering from surgery, a photograph of a mountain temple tucked quietly into a briefcase that will be opened days later. No card, no explanation, just resonance. One such recipient, a former lieutenant, tells a journalist, "You don't thank him, you adjust your spine." But amid these elegant ripples, pressure mounts from within. Not dissent, just uncertainty. Whispers begin among the inner circle. Will Watanabe name a successor? Will he retire? He says nothing, but the atmosphere thickens. And then, in the spring of 2007, something unprecedented occurs. He speaks, publicly. A press conference is held. Not called by him, but by the organization's legal wing. Watanabe arrives without fanfare, dressed in a charcoal suit, necktie subdued. Cameras flash. Reporters lean forward. He offers a single statement. "In a world increasingly obsessed with volume, we remain committed to clarity. That is all." Then he bows and leaves. 17 words. They are dissected endlessly. Pundits speculate on hidden meanings. Some call it an exit speech, others a warning. But to those inside the syndicate, it's confirmation. He is preparing the end, but not just of his role, of an era. He begins shrinking his schedule. Fewer meetings, shorter briefings. Some days he doesn't arrive at the office at all, but when he does, the halls still clear. Not from obligation, from reverence, because by now, Watanabe has done something rare in the world of organized crime. He's survived, not just physically, but reputationally. He's evaded arrest, outlived rivals, transformed a syndicate of brawlers and gamblers into a model of institutional resilience. And he's done it all without a single recorded outburst, without a single known indulgence, and without a single photo of him smiling. Many people still think that's why he became untouchable, not because of what he did, but because of what he withheld. So what do you think? Can the most powerful legacy be built from everything you chose not to do? One of his assistants, now retired, once described his farewell moment with Watanabe. It was late, the building nearly empty. He was packing his things when Watanabe appeared in the doorway, looked around the office and said only, "Everything's been said, not by me, but by what I left unsaid." And then he walked away. That autumn, Kobe's trees dropped their leaves early. The city hums softer than usual. And in a third-floor office with a window facing east, a cup of tea goes cold. No one touches it, not yet. Autumn deepens over Kobe. The leaves fall like old agreements, quiet, consistent, unavoidable. And inside Yamaguchi-gumi headquarters, the routines remain unchanged, but the pacing slows. Not from weakness, but from something else, something harder to name. Watanabe still arrives most mornings, still walks the corridor with that same composed posture, still enters his office without pause, without nod, without fanfare. But something is different. He doesn't carry the notebook anymore, the black one, the one with its frayed corners and cryptic diagrams, no longer accompanies him. Some wonder if he's locked it away. Others suspect he's memorized everything in it and simply doesn't need the weight anymore. Either way, its absence is louder than any declaration, and in its place, a plain white sheet of paper, always blank. Every day, a new one. He folds it into quarters, places it by his teacup, and doesn't touch it again. Symbol, ritual, test, no one asks. Internally, the machine continues, but now with the subtle friction of waiting. His lieutenants move with the same precision, the same whispering efficiency. But in the elevators, they begin asking each other questions with their eyebrows. The silence between decisions stretches, as if each one is echoing forward to a moment that hasn't quite arrived. Watanabe, for his part, offers no clarification. When asked, very delicately, about long-term leadership planning, he replies only, "There's no such thing. Only long-term listening." He has started spending more time in the garden behind headquarters, a small enclosed space few have entered. One bonsai, 2 stone lanterns, 1 stone path. He walks it each afternoon, always barefoot, regardless of weather. A junior associate once glanced through the window and saw Watanabe standing still for 15 minutes beside the koi pond. When asked what he was doing, the man replied, "I think he was waiting for the water to forget him." Outside, the world becomes louder. Japan tightens further. More anti-gang laws, more property seizures. Banks begin freezing even suspected affiliates' accounts. Social media explodes with public denunciation. Politicians line up to show they're cracking down. And yet Watanabe remains untouched, not because he's hidden, because there's nothing to grab. He spent decades erasing his own contours, smoothing the edges of his presence until what remains is not a man, but a mechanism. He doesn't argue. He doesn't protest. He simply shifts, quietly, repeatedly, until whatever was trying to hold him forgets what it was reaching for. There's an incident worth noting here. In early 2008, an investigative journalist publishes a damning exposé, 50 pages, names named, charts drawn, sources cited. Watanabe's name appears 3 times, briefly, each time framed in uncertainty. Alleged, believed, presumed. The article makes national headlines. Watanabe does not respond, but within a week, the journalist receives a package. Inside is a single book, The Art of Archiving, a dry academic tome about metadata and document decay. No note, no return address, but a line is underlined in red. A document cannot testify if its reader cannot interpret its silence. The journalist never writes about him again. Back inside headquarters, another evolution is underway. The tea, yes, the tea. For decades, Watanabe's ritual brew has been sencha, clean, grassy, reliable. But now, he begins switching it out. Subtle variations, gyokuro, hojicha, occasionally even matcha, each with a slightly different scent, a slightly different mood. It becomes noticed and studied. Members whisper theories. He's signaling something. He's testing us. He's preparing to shift the tone. One lieutenant, when summoned to a meeting and served genmaicha, roasted rice tea, replied, "Understood," and left before a word was spoken, and still no successor is named. Instead, Watanabe begins a new series of interactions, not with lieutenants, with drivers, couriers, cleaners. He invites them into his office, briefly, always alone. No notes are taken, no orders are issued, but afterward, these individuals walk taller, quieter, more careful. One janitor later admits to overhearing him say only one thing: "Even the air has hierarchy." Many people still think these meetings were his final recruitment effort, not for power, but for purity. So, what do you think? Is legacy made by those with titles, or by those who absorb intention through osmosis? Spring returns. Cherry blossoms bloom outside the garden. Watanabe is seen standing beneath them one morning, watching the petals fall. He doesn't move, doesn't reach out. He lets them fall across his shoulders, unmoved. Later that week, a meeting is called, the first all-hands gathering in nearly a year. Everyone expects the announcement: succession, retirement, dissolution. Watanabe arrives exactly on time. He stands before the room, quiet as breath, then says, "If rhythm is maintained, a conductor may leave the stage." He bows, deep, longer than usual, then turns and walks out. No instructions, no blessing, no name. And the organization, it doesn't collapse. The lieutenants adjust. The captains recalibrate. The rhythm continues, because that's what he built. Not a hierarchy, a pulse. And somewhere in Kobe, in a room with no files and a calendar turned eternally to April, a cup of genmaicha sits cooling on an old oak desk. By summer, the headquarters begins to hum with a different kind of energy. Not nervous, not uncertain, just lighter. Like a room that's been quietly rearranged while everyone was sleeping. Watanabe is rarely seen now. No official statement has been made, no documents filed, but the shift is palpable. He's not gone, but he's no longer the center. And yet, in his absence, every protocol remains in place. The teacups still face east. The doors still open 7 minutes early. Even the koi in the garden pond are fed with the same timing he once kept, at 4:03 p.m. Never a minute before or after. This is what legacy looks like when it's not about memory, but motion. Still, behind the formal continuity, some things begin to fade, slowly, elegantly. One morning, a driver arrives to collect Watanabe, as he has every Thursday for 14 years. But this time, there's no request, no note, just the quiet understanding. His presence is no longer required. He bows, returns to his car, and drives home. He never drives again. The man later says, "I wasn't dismissed. I was released." Meanwhile, inside the organization, subtle promotions begin to take effect. They aren't announced. Names simply appear where others once were. Schedules are updated. Seating arrangements change. But none of it feels sudden, because Watanabe had prepared for all of this, not with instructions, with atmosphere. Around this time, Kobe's civic officials begin noting an odd trend. The Yamaguchi-gumi seems to be shrinking, but not failing. Membership numbers drop slightly. Office spaces are downsized. Paper trails dry up. But financial flows remain steady, and law enforcement reports fewer incidents than ever. It's not retreat, it's condensation. Watanabe, though mostly unseen, is still present in whispers. His name comes up when a lieutenant signs a contract with a third-tier supplier and then pauses, recalling a phrase. 3 steps away is still too close. Or when a young enforcer volunteers to take blame for an error, and someone murmurs, "He's watched the wind." Even outside the organization, he's become folklore. A cafe owner in Kyoto reports a man who once came in every Tuesday morning, ordered tea, never spoke. After months, the owner noticed he always left a single coin beneath the napkin. Always the same amount. Always the same coin. And then one day, he stopped coming. The cafe owner framed the coin. In the press, journalists begin to speculate on Watanabe's health, his age, whether he's been quietly sidelined or retired, whether a power struggle is brewing. But those inside know there's nothing to struggle over, because power in Watanabe's world was never held. It was only passed through. One curious note from this period: the resurgence of analog tools. Computers are used, yes, but increasingly senior members revert to notebooks, cassette recorders, typewriters. Some even begin learning shorthand. A new kind of ritual emerges. Information is written, then erased, then rewritten again in simpler terms. A cultural purge, perhaps, or a nod to Watanabe's method. Refine until invisible. Meanwhile, in a small seaside town outside Kobe, a neighbor reports seeing an older man walking the cliffs at dusk. He never speaks, always wears the same gray coat, pauses at the same bench. When asked who he is, the neighbor says, "No one important." But the wind waits for him. Back at HQ, the bonsai in Watanabe's old office is still tended to, meticulously, its branches pruned, its roots inspected weekly. But no one claims the desk. The chair remains pushed in. The calendar, as always, stuck on April. The blank sheets of paper, they're still delivered. Every morning, folded once, left on the table. No one dares remove them. There's another tale from this season. An envelope appears on the desk of a newly appointed regional captain. Inside is a single playing card, King of Spades. Nothing else. No signature. No explanation. The man doesn't panic. He doesn't brag. He frames it in glass and mounts it behind his chair. When asked about it later, he says, "I'm not sure if it's approval or warning. Either way, it reminds me to sit straighter." Many people still think that Watanabe never truly retired, that he's still influencing operations through invisible channels, through gestures remembered, through pauses copied. So what do you think? When a man becomes rhythm, does he ever really stop moving? Even the police begin adjusting their tone. One retired officer, previously outspoken about cracking down on the Yakuza, is quoted in an interview. "There were worse things than Watanabe's order, like what might come after." It's not praise, it's perspective, because no matter how cleanly the office runs now, no matter how smoothly decisions are made, there's one truth everyone inside the organization understands. Watanabe never chose a successor, not out of indecision, but because he never led in a way that could be inherited. And so, in a sense, everyone inherits a piece of him. His posture, his silence, his emphasis on alignment over aggression, on timing over impulse. They call it iron silence now, not just his style, his absence. The year is 2008, and in the heart of Kobe, the world keeps moving. Subways sliding through concrete arteries, street vendors lighting their grills before dawn, commuters checking the time, rushing but never arriving faster than the day allows. And somewhere, Watanabe, whether seated in a distant garden or a darkened office no one now claims, remains precisely where he's always been, out of frame, but never out of reach. Inside the Yamaguchi-gumi, that invisible pull continues. Nothing has collapsed. No factions have split. There are no turf wars, no whispered betrayals. In fact, by every legal and logistical metric, the organization is healthier than ever. But the core is cooler now, quieter, like the eye of a storm that's learned not to move. The lieutenants don't call themselves leaders, not openly. They defer decisions not to Watanabe's authority, but to his absence. You think he'd allow this? That doesn't feel like his tempo. Hold on, is this TI'd too early? Even mundane actions take on ritualistic weight. Meeting times are staggered, so no two captains ever enter the same elevator. Seating arrangements rotate monthly. Contracts are signed using fountain pens, never ballpoint. And if a signature smudges, it's redone. All this unspoken. All this because of him. One former member, now retired and living in Okinawa, is asked in an interview, "What made Watanabe different?" He replies, "He never let anyone borrow his voice. That's why we had to develop our own silences. Back in the city, his influence deepens in stranger places." A university professor in Kyoto cites his leadership in a lecture on decentralized systems. A management book references the Watanabe doctrine without ever naming him directly. And in Tokyo, a startup founder admits that her company's onboarding manual includes an unattributed quote, "To manage well, remain unread." This is how a myth fossilizes, through application, not applause. Meanwhile, the broader world continues spinning. Global markets wobble, recession looms. And in Japan, financial institutions brace for aftershocks. Regulatory heat intensifies. One new law attempts to ban influence without presence. Though vague, the subtext is clear. It's aimed at people like him. But by now, trying to outlaw Watanabe is like trying to evict a concept. He doesn't need a seat at any table. His name doesn't appear on any contracts. His phone number, if he ever had one, hasn't rung in years. And yet shipments still arrive on time. Debts are still repaid. Restaurants still reserve back tables just in case. One quiet example. A shipping mishap occurs in Osaka. A container rerouted, delivery missed. No threats, no punishment. Just a call from an anonymous number. "You were early. You confused rhythm with speed." The shipment is corrected. The team begins studying cadence, not maps. Back at headquarters, the room adjacent to Watanabe's office has become a kind of sanctum. Not in form, but in function. No one claims it. No one uses it. It houses nothing but a low wooden table, one scroll, and a single chair. The scroll? A calligraphy piece that reads, "Tread softly where silence lives." Some believe Watanabe painted it himself. Others think it was gifted. No one knows. No one asks. What's clearer, though, is this. The space isn't for meetings. It's for waiting, for reflection, for him, if he ever chooses to return. But here's the thing. No one's sure if he ever left. Reports surface occasionally. A man in a gray coat boarding a ferry at dawn. A guest at a Kyoto inn who always leaves one teacup untouched. An old gentleman browsing the history section of a used bookstore, asking about volumes on disappearing systems. Never confirmed, always quietly noted. And each time, the ripple moves through the organization. Not panic, not excitement, just recalibration. Younger members begin adjusting their posture. Mid-level administrators double-check phrasing on memos. One regional branch delays a partnership deal. Not because anything is wrong, but because the timing feels off. No one has to explain what that means. Mainstream historical records during this period begin to flatten. Law enforcement logs fewer incidents. Financial analysts point to a strange ethical uptick in regions historically tied to syndicate activity. No one wants to say it, but some begin wondering if Watanabe's influence, his invisible moral grid, is regulating behavior even outside his circle. It's not sainthood, it's system. And system, when well designed, doesn't care if the architect's still watching. One rainy afternoon, an anonymous package arrives at HQ. Inside, a photograph. It's old, grainy, black and white. A young Watanabe, back in his construction days, holding a shovel, standing in shadow. On the back, written in tiny, precise handwriting. Even foundations forget their shape. There's no return address, but the image is framed and placed in the hallway near the stairwell. No label, no explanation. From that day forward, new recruits are asked a question during orientation. What do you build when no one plans to remember you? Many people still think that Watanabe's most dangerous quality wasn't his leadership. It was his vanishing. So what do you think? If a man becomes myth, does that make him immortal? Or does it make him untouchable? Perhaps it doesn't matter, because every time a door opens slightly early, every time a command is paused just long enough to reconsider, every time someone chooses precision over noise, that's Watanabe, not walking in, just never having left. Evening falls over Kobe in that slow, weightless way it does in early autumn, light fading not as an exit, but as a courtesy. The buildings hold their warmth a little longer. The streetlights blink on without needing to be told. Somewhere above it all, behind curtains that never part, Watanabe exists like a bookmark, placed gently between pages no one's allowed to reread. Inside the Yamaguchi-gumi, operations continue as they always have. Clean, efficient, respectful. If anything, the quiet is even more pronounced now. Not from fear, from design, Watanabe's design. The systems he left behind are still humming, not from inertia, but from belief. No one knows exactly when he stopped showing up. It wasn't a date, it was a sensation. A morning when the hallway felt too balanced. A meeting that started with no adjustment needed. A message passed without a pause. That was the day they realized he wasn't coming in, and nothing fell apart. Because nothing had been held together by force. That's the final brilliance of his structure. It didn't require enforcement, only alignment. Still, there are signs, hints, reverberations. In a leadership memo written entirely in haiku. In a policy change communicated through a single quote about brushstrokes. In a sudden absence of sugar cubes at the tea table, replaced without comment by rock salt. To outsiders, it might all seem esoteric, pretentious even, but to those inside, it's perfect clarity, because Watanabe taught them that clarity isn't what's said. It's what survives once everything else has stopped. He has, in every meaningful sense, become the pause before action, the slow exhale before a decision, the feeling in the room when someone says, "Wait, what would he have done?" Many people still think he's watching, that somewhere there's a small screen, a private feed, a ledger still being updated in handwriting only he can read. So, what do you think? If no one sees you rule, but everyone adjusts their course as if you're watching, are you gone, or are you simply perfecting your absence? Let's pause here, let the rhythm soften, let the city grow dim. Watanabe is no longer young. Wherever he walks now, if he walks at all, it's likely beneath trees that remember older winds. The buildings he helped build, literally and later structurally, stand quietly. His name isn't carved on any stone, but it echoes in door hinges, in staff protocols, in the bowed heads of men who never met him, but still quote him. He may still have tea, though no one brings it to him anymore. He may still fold paper, though perhaps now he leaves it unfolded, a blank testament to completion. Even if he's gone, he's not finished. That's the difference. His rhythm carries. So now, as we close this chapter of his quiet empire, let's do as he did. No grand exits, just a softer breath. A long, calm look toward a horizon that doesn't need to explain itself. The garden waits. The paper stays blank, and silence in the end is still listening. Morning in Kobe begins not with noise, but with suggestion. A window cracked just enough to let in the hum of scooters below. The scent of fish broth turning in alley kitchens. A delivery man pausing to straighten a stack of newspapers out of habit. No alarms, no sirens, just motion. And inside, what was once the inner sanctum of the Yamaguchi-gumi. The lights come on at exactly 6:32 a.m. No one turns them on. They are on a timer, set decades ago, and never adjusted, because even electricity obeys what Watanabe built. By now, his retirement is unofficially accepted. There's no announcement, no farewell, no ceremonial passing of the ink brush, just the fact that his name no longer appears in rotation. His door remains closed. His coat, if it ever hung there, is gone. And yet, when a lieutenant returns from a routine site inspection and instinctively knocks twice on that empty door before reporting to anyone else, no one finds it strange. Because empty doors too, remember? But a system without its architect must stretch eventually. It can hold for a long time, sure, especially one made of silence and posture. Still, people shift. Patterns strain, and Watanabe knew this. That's why, years before stepping back, he planted placeholders, concepts dressed as customs, informal redundancies, he called them. Leaders trained not to replace, but to reflect. Systems built in triplicate. Agreements designed to hold even if no one could remember who first proposed them. In early 2009, a brief rupture threatens that balance. A younger affiliate, ambitious, clever, too eager, makes an unsanctioned move on a nightclub contract in Nagoya. It's sloppy, too fast, too loud. The reaction? Not a call, not a visit. Instead, an envelope is placed quietly in his mailbox. No signature. Just a phrase written in ink so light it almost fades. Have you counted your shadows? He steps down within 48 hours. No meeting is held. No punishment discussed. The position is simply vacant again. That's the nature of what Watanabe left behind. A structure where correction requires no confrontation, where shame is the sentence and stillness is the mechanism. Elsewhere, in the quieter prefectures, his legacy begins mutating into something resembling tradition. A new generation of members, many born after his prime, begin quoting him like scripture. A few take it too far. One branch starts holding monthly Watanabe readings, where young members sit in silence for 20 minutes before discussing a single phrase from his known sayings. The Kobe leadership quietly issues a memo. If you're quoting him too loudly, you're misquoting him. The gatherings stop, but the reverence remains. Even outside the syndicate, his legend begins to reach strange places. A Zen monastery in Nara starts referencing his leadership style in meditation training. A Tokyo-based management consulting firm names a principle after him, the Watanabe margin, the space between thought and action that defines clarity. And still, no one has seen him, though sometimes reports trickle in. A train conductor in Hiroshima swears an older man in a gray coat helped a blind passenger disembark, then disappeared. A calligraphy teacher in Sapporo recalls a customer who corrected her form with a single word, breathe, then left without paying. A bookstore owner in Kobe receives a letter returning a borrowed volume from 1981. The signature? A folded paper crane, all hearsay, all unconfirmed, yet each one causes a subtle shiver to pass through those who once served under him. Because that's the kind of presence Watanabe cultivated. Not loud, not even present. Just inevitable. And what of the organization? Well, it adapts. It continues, but its edges soften. Violence is now rare, too costly, too traceable. Most disputes are handled with timing, negotiation, and paperwork. Captains are promoted for restraint, not reach. New members are trained in 3 languages, not just intimidation. There is a growing sense that Watanabe's greatest weapon wasn't fear or money or even discipline. It was duration, the ability to make decisions that outlived questions. One regional enforcer, when asked why he follows rules from a man he's never met, says, "Because every time I thought about breaking them, they were already ahead of me." Even law enforcement seems to shift. The tone of investigations grows less aggressive, more speculative. Raids become rarer. Prosecutors tread carefully, not because of danger, but because of doubt. One retired detective puts it best. How do you arrest a system that doesn't require attendance? By mid-2010, a small file in a government cabinet is closed. It contains only a few notes on Watanabe. Sightings, rumors. One photo, dated, blurry, and a final line handwritten in pencil. He no longer moves. He waits. So what do you think? Is this disappearance? Or has he become the still point in a wheel that no longer spins? Because it doesn't have to. He once said, "A storm cannot vanish. It can only forget how to spin." And maybe that's what he did. He unspun himself so the wind could rest. Spring passes quietly over Kobe, and summer arrives not with fanfare, but with its usual slow invasion. Cicadas starting their rhythms at dusk, laundromats running later into the evening, the scent of grilled mackerel drifting from alleyways, and in the old neighborhoods, people speak of how calm things feel lately. No one says it's because of Watanabe, but no one says it isn't. Inside Yamaguchi-gumi headquarters, the rhythm continues. Men come and go at prescribed intervals. Reports are compiled and shared in person only. And every third Thursday, tea is served at 3:46 p.m., just as Watanabe once preferred. They don't call it a tradition. They just do it. What's remarkable now is how little discussion is required. The systems Watanabe set in motion have matured. They self-correct. Like a bonsai trimmed so often it now grows into the shape of discipline without effort. A newly promoted lieutenant is asked why no one questions the processes anymore. He shrugs and says, "When you inherit silence, speaking feels like vandalism." In Tokyo, a journalist attempts to write a retrospective on Watanabe's legacy. He contacts over a dozen former affiliates, law enforcement officials, and academics. Most decline to comment. A few offer guarded praise. But one source, an anonymous former legal advisor to a Yamaguchi-gumi front company, provides a single line. You don't measure his impact by what happened under him. You measure it by how little has broken since. That line becomes the article's closing sentence. It's never published. A few weeks later, a package arrives at the journalist's home. Inside, a used metronome set at 60 beats per minute, ticking softly. No note. The journalist retires the piece. This is the sort of echo Watanabe leaves behind. Not a footprint, a ripple that corrects your posture without touching you. And while the public world adjusts to a post-Watanabe landscape, inside the syndicate, the work of interpretation begins. A document starts circulating informally, compiled by mid-tier captains. It's called the Ledger of Pauses. It lists moments Watanabe hesitated, times he delayed a decision by 1 day, 1 hour, or 1 breath. Each entry is followed by speculation. Was it strategy? Was it a test? Was it courtesy? It becomes a study in patience, a Rosetta Stone for interpreting intentional inaction. Some treat it like scripture, others think it's nonsense, but no one throws it away. One entry details the time Watanabe declined to attend a funeral, sending only a single camellia blossom in a black lacquer box. The ledger notes this act alongside a quote he once left on a whiteboard. Absence creates contour. Many people still think that was the moment the organization learned how to exist without him. Not in loss, but in outline. So, what do you think? Is a structure stronger when it remembers who built it, or when it forgets the builder, but not the blueprint? Back in Kobe, changes occur. The hallway where Watanabe's office once stood is repainted, subtly. The same color, but with a glossier finish. The door is left intact, but now always ajar. Not out of disrespect. It's meant to breathe. Inside the office, the bonsai remains, but the chair is replaced with a tatami mat. Visitors come not to speak, but to sit for 5 minutes. No timer. Just a shared understanding that when you feel the pause arrive, you leave. One new member enters on his 3rd week with the organization. He kneels, closes his eyes, and reportedly whispers, "I don't know what I'm here to learn yet." He's promoted 2 years later. Watanabe's presence also begins filtering into unexpected places. A prestigious design school in Osaka names an award after him. The Invisible Hand Prize, granted annually for work that demonstrates structural clarity without aesthetic aggression. A tech startup CEO refers to his Watanabe Hour, 60 minutes daily with no meetings, no notifications, and no speech. Just awareness. Even a newly elected mayor in a southern prefecture, during a televised debate, references the discipline of absence when asked about his leadership model. No one explains it. Everyone seems to understand. And still, no confirmation of Watanabe's whereabouts. He remains unphotographed, untraced, unmentioned in any official capacity, until quietly something happens. A monk from a small temple in the hills outside Kyoto reaches out to a local reporter. He says there's a man who visits once a month, always at sunrise, never speaks, just sits facing east, brings his own tea, never drinks it, leaves after 1 hour. The monk describes him as old but measured. He wears a gray coat, leaves no offering, only silence. The reporter visits the temple, waits, watches. No one arrives. But beside the meditation rock, a paper crane is left, folded tightly, balanced on its beak. The monk nods. He's real, he says, but only if you stop asking. Back at Yamaguchi-gumi HQ, the systems hold. The meetings start on time. The members speak low. And when something feels slightly off, a shipment delayed, a report imprecise, a call is made, not to a man, to a method, to a memory that behaves like motion. Because Watanabe didn't build a throne, he built choreography, and now the dance continues without him on stage. The rain returns to Kobe, soft and unscheduled. It taps against glass panels at Yamaguchi-gumi headquarters, drips down the corners of awnings, slides into gutters with no destination but persistence. And inside, the rhythm continues. Not brisk, not slow, just steady. There is no official successor. There never was. The title of kumicho, once formalized through ceremony and rank, now feels like a misnomer. No one wears it. No one dares. Because no one is expected to. Not after Watanabe. Instead, the organization operates like a machine whose engineer built it to run without ever needing a mechanic. Each gear fits another. Each part checks itself. It's not perfection. It's harmony. One senior administrator refers to it as structural silence. He says, "It's not that we're afraid to break the rules. It's that we're reluctant to interrupt them. And yet, even machines require lubrication now and then." Friction has returned, quietly. Nothing dramatic. Just murmurs. Some of the younger captains, ambitious, Western-educated, impatient, begin to push. Not publicly, but in tone, in body language, in questions asked with too little space between them. Why can't we expand into digital currencies? Why must our meetings still be undocumented? Why is silence still treated as a form of leadership? These are valid questions, and yet dangerous ones, because when a system has been built to run on timing, asking too many questions at once is like knocking on all the doors of a quiet house simultaneously. The response is elegant. One morning, each of those younger captains finds a message on their desk. A single index card, handwritten, same paper, same ink. Each card contains a different poem. One reads, "The branch that grows fastest invites wind to test its spine. Sit deeper in root." No threats, no reprimands, but the message lands. One captain requests reassignment to Hokkaido by the end of the week. Another begins delaying his own speaking time at meetings by exactly 10 seconds. The third He sends a gift to the courier who delivered his card. A bonsai knife, newly sharpened. Meanwhile, Watanabe's legend spreads, but not like wildfire, like mist. At a university in Tokyo, a graduate seminar on leadership includes a lecture on disappearing authority. The professor opens the session with an old photograph. Watanabe seated at a table, expression unreadable, chopsticks resting on a white ceramic stand. Behind him, nothing but window light. The students are asked, what makes him dangerous? No one answers immediately. Finally, one young woman says, I think it's because we're not sure if he's reacting to us or remembering something we haven't done yet. Outside academia, his legacy slips into stranger corners. A jazz bar in Kyoto changes its playlist rotation after a man in a gray coat leaves a note. The silence between songs is too short. The bar doesn't know who sent it, but they comply. A middle-aged librarian in Nagoya finds an anonymous donation left inside a returned book, the Book of Tea. Tucked between pages 17 and 18, a pressed camellia. No explanation. And once in Osaka, a tailor receives a custom order written on thick paper stock. Gray, single vent, no lining, must disappear in motion. The suit is delivered. Payment left in a lacquered box. No return. No adjustments. Back at headquarters, Watanabe's former office remains untouched. Still that single bonsai. Still the tatami mat. Still the folded paper waiting on the table each morning. There's talk now of sealing the room. Some say it's time. Others say to wait. One elder, the oldest active member, suggests something else. Leave the door open. Not for him. For the part of him that never left. Because that's the thing. Watanabe doesn't haunt the halls like a ghost. He lingers like a standard. Every elevator ride taken in silence. Every report written with precision. Every pause before a decision. That's him. Not watching, not judging, just reminding. Many people still think that Watanabe's legacy is proof that you can teach without speaking, lead without appearing, and change the trajectory of hundreds by adjusting your own breath. So what do you think? Is leadership what you do? Or what you no longer have to do once others remember how you did it? Summer ends. Kobe cools. The cicadas stop. The suits return to darker shades. The teacups steam again. And somewhere, in a temple, on a hill, in a city too busy to look up, an old man places a folded paper on the ground, bows to no one, and walks away before anyone thinks to watch. Autumn folds into itself. The breeze over Kobe begins to bite. Smoke curls out from food stalls again, and the city's tempo tightens. More coats, fewer pauses, earlier nights. Leaves fall not with drama, but with memory, and each one seems to land in time with a rhythm that once had a conductor, though no one says his name aloud anymore. Inside the Yamaguchi-gumi headquarters, the pace never changes. It doesn't have to. The organization now resembles something beyond syndicate or system. It's more like a climate. Adaptive. Self-regulating. Predictable only because the wind once learned how to move between its walls. And though no official title is ever reassigned, the inner circle operates on rotational leadership. Different voices, same cadence. Policy is passed without conflict. Authority is shared without ego. Even newcomers are inducted with an almost monastic hush. Handshakes are fewer, eye contact longer, and silence holds the weight once reserved for oaths. One young inductee remarks to his sponsor, "But who leads us now?" The sponsor smiles faintly. "You'll know when you're quiet enough to hear it." And still, Watanabe does not return, but neither has he vanished. Reports continue to surface. A hotel concierge in Fukuoka receives a reservation under a forgotten name. The guest checks in with no luggage, stays exactly 4 hours, leaves behind a newspaper folded into a perfect square. Nothing missing, nothing taken. In Nara, a temple records a donation. 5 blank sheets of rice paper wrapped in silk thread. The monk who finds them writes a note. The paper is not empty. We just haven't earned what it will say. It's never confirmed, of course. These things never are, and yet they ripple. One of Watanabe's old subordinates, now retired and living alone in Sapporo, receives a parcel. No return address. Inside, a small circular mirror and a note reading, "Check if you still disappear when no one's watching." The man reportedly closes his shop the next day, not out of fear, just clarity. And in Kobe, that same rhythm endures. Every third Thursday, tea is still poured. Every morning, a white page is still folded. The staff still refers to the chair in the outer hallway as his, even though no one has sat in it since 2007. One afternoon, a visitor, foreign, polite, unaware, asks the receptionist, "Who's the chair for?" She doesn't answer, just smiles, not dismissive, just trained. Mainstream historians are now less interested in prosecuting Watanabe's story and more intrigued by what it reveals about Japan's capacity for order through minimalism. Academic papers begin framing him as a case study in non-interventionist authority, a kind of invisible scaffolding leadership model. One scholar calls him the architect of respectful decay. Another says, he taught his system how to corrode with dignity. But inside the Yamaguchi-gumi, those theories fall flat. They're too clinical, too external. Because to those who worked beneath him, Watanabe was never just an operator. He was gravity, not seen, not felt, just assumed, always pulling, always balancing. In late 2010, a quiet event takes place. No announcement, no press, just a small envelope left on the tatami mat of his old office. Inside, a key, attached, a tag with one word written on it, return. No one claims to have left it. No one opens the lock it fits. The key is placed on a shelf beside the bonsai. And then, something shifts. The inner meetings, normally conducted with exact spacing between statements, begin starting 2 minutes later than usual. A stylistic memo changes the font on official documents to one slightly closer to brush script. Even the T, formerly rotated every quarter, is now kept consistent year-round. Not regression, just homage, like the silence after a song you can't stop humming. There's a moment worth pausing on. A long-serving lieutenant, now in his 60s, once considered Watanabe's shadow, visits the garden behind headquarters one late afternoon. He sits by the koi pond, alone, and weeps. No funeral, no news, no trigger. Just the kind of sorrow that waits years to arrive. When asked about it later, he says, "The world's quieter now, but I still feel like I need permission to exhale." So what do you think? Can someone's discipline last long after their breath has stopped? Can a man become not myth, but method? Can the absence of a voice still issue commands? Maybe that's why no one's touched the bonsai, or changed the calendar, or dared to erase his name from the rotation, even if no one's expecting him. Because some presences don't need to be confirmed. They only need to not be disproven. And Watanabe? He doesn't need to return. He already left everything necessary behind. The days grow shorter. Kobe's air takes on the dry, metallic crispness of early winter. The kind that stings the nose just enough to remind you it's nearly the end of the year. Shopkeepers begin stringing quiet strands of lights. Steam rises from ramen pots on street corners. And somewhere in the stillness between breaths, the absence of Yoshinori Watanabe continues to feel very much like presence. Inside the Yamaguchi-gumi headquarters, the rhythm doesn't change. Not because no one dares to alter it, but because no one sees a need to. It works. There are no fights over territory, no courtroom battles, no headlines. The organization hums like a well-maintained timepiece, and even the newest members move with the kind of careful coordination more often found in ballet than crime syndicates. A courier carrying documents across 2 prefectures is trained to pause at every third traffic light, not for safety, but for timing. A new recruit in Shizuoka is asked to sit through 3 hours of silent tea service before being told whether he's accepted. He is. A question arises at a policy review. Should they update their financial platforms to a newer, more global interface? The answer comes not in a vote, but in a 3-sentence memo. New tools are only useful if they learn our hands. Speed is not a virtue. Rhythm remains the gatekeeper. No one argues. There's an odd comfort in the way Watanabe still speaks. Through margins, delays, decisions taken at half-step, one internal message board begins tracking these micro-decisions. They call them echoes. It's never formally acknowledged, but captains begin referencing it. Wait, what did Echo No. 117 say again? Right. A clean exit begins with a slow entrance. That becomes the unofficial slogan of their offshore division. Even rival syndicates have started to imitate this approach. Not in structure, but in subtlety. Several smaller families across Kyushu and Kanto have begun holding leadership briefings seated on tatami mats. One of them requires members to deliver updates by writing haiku instead of reports. A journalist, digging into these practices, labels it the Watanabe drift. She writes, "This is not legacy in the traditional sense. It's infection, quiet, self-spreading, cultural osmosis disguised as efficiency." She publishes the piece. 2 weeks later, she retracts it, says she felt she misread the tone. No one pressures her, at least not directly. But she receives a package a few days after the retraction. Inside, a small wooden ruler, hand-carved, no label. Engraved on one side, "Measure once, adjust before the cut." Meanwhile, in Kobe, the office hallway that leads to Watanabe's former room is now referred to in hushed tones as the margin. Not officially, not in floor plans, but when someone says, "He's gone to the margin," everyone understands. He's stepped away, briefly, to consider before acting, to breathe, to let silence finish the sentence. A lieutenant overseeing operations in Osaka begins handwriting his reports again, just to slow down. Another begins using fountain pens exclusively, claiming that friction clarifies intent. Even when younger members rebel, their rebellion carries his fingerprints. One man, sharp, modern, digitally inclined, proposes a new algorithm to streamline collections. It's efficient, smart, cold. It's rejected, but not by committee, by timing. The reply to his proposal arrives 48 hours later. A single envelope, inside, a printed screenshot of his algorithm, annotated in black pen. Not corrections, questions. Is speed the enemy of witness? What do we lose if no one lingers? Would this work if the recipient wept? No name signed. He scraps the algorithm, starts again. Not out of fear, out of awareness. Elsewhere, rumors return. A train conductor in Himeji reports helping an elderly man who knew the entire schedule by memory, but asked no questions. A gardener at a mountainside villa notices a man sitting on a bench for hours, saying nothing, leaving behind only a folded page tucked under a rock. It read, "When the roots forget the wind, the tree begins to perform." These sightings are unverifiable, but they circulate anyway, and each time they do, members tighten their routine. Not because they believe he's watching, but because the world behaves better when they act like he could be. One senior captain calls it the phantom audit, a sense that, even now, Watanabe could walk in, check the temperature of a room with one glance, and say nothing while everyone reevaluates their posture, because that's what he taught them. Leadership isn't what you say. It's what you leave behind that people still lean toward. A historical note. By the end of 2010, Japan's largest criminal organizations are reporting fewer public incidents, fewer prosecutions, and a surprising increase in reported internal disciplinary processes. Some analysts attribute this to fear of government surveillance. Others whisper a name, but no one says it too loudly. In December, a box arrives at Yamaguchi-gumi HQ. No return address. Inside, a wristwatch. Vintage. Unticking. Its hands permanently fixed at 8:12. The time Watanabe used to arrive. The message is clear. The hour doesn't need to move because the rhythm still does. And the man? He's exactly where he planned to be. Nowhere. And everywhere. The new year arrives without countdown. No one at headquarters wears hats or lifts a toast. The calendar is changed, yes, but quietly. The page flipped by a junior officer at exactly midnight, as instructed. No ceremony, just continuation, because in the world that Watanabe shaped, celebration is what happens when a system doesn't falter. And the Yamaguchi-gumi? Still doesn't. Now, 13 years since he took formal leadership, and several more since he quietly relinquished it. His echo remains intact. Some say more intact than ever, because now it isn't held by his voice. It's carried in their bones. One veteran member puts it plainly over lunch. We're no longer asking what he would do. We're asking what he already did that we haven't noticed yet. And they're not being poetic. They're being precise. In early January, a captain in Nagoya reopens a storage unit linked to a dormant transport subsidiary. It contains nothing illegal, just boxes of printed ledgers, each labeled only by season: spring, summer, autumn, winter. No year. Inside, receipts, schedules, driver logs, notes on roadside tea shops. Nothing dramatic, but as he reads them, the captain begins to notice patterns. The roots form loops. Certain names appear at consistent intervals, then disappear. The placement of meetings seems to match, of all things, the phases of the moon. He shares his findings. The inner circle reviews. Within a month, transport efficiency improves by 17%. Nothing new was added. They simply returned to a rhythm long embedded in their own architecture. A rhythm Watanabe left behind, quietly, beneath dust. And this is the genius of the man. He didn't just lead. He laced his logic into layers the rest of them wouldn't even find until they were mature enough to see it. One quiet evening, a high-ranking strategist walks into the empty third-floor room, the former office of Watanabe, and sits on the tatami mat. He's not supposed to. No one sat there in years, but he sits anyway, not out of defiance, out of exhaustion. He's been carrying the organization's finances for over a decade. His reports are immaculate, his audits spotless. But something has felt off lately. Something unspoken. Like a delay in breath he can't quite diagnose. He breathes, he waits. And then he notices the bonsai. It's leaning. Not sick, not untended. But the soil has shifted imperceptibly. The base has rotated a few degrees. And with it, the whole shape. It's no longer symmetrical. He stares at it for a long time. And when he leaves the room, he rewrites his report, removing 2 redundancies, splitting an account between 3 branches instead of 1. No instruction told him to do this, just the way the tree leaned. This is what remains of Watanabe. Not a man, not a memory, but a code. A grammar of decisions folded into everything from hiring schedules to hallway etiquette. And like any language, it evolves. In Kyoto, a minor affiliate introduces an AI-powered tracking system for equipment logistics. It's sleek, effective, but the interface feels loud, distracting. A captain from Kobe visits, reviews the system, says nothing. But when he returns, He sends the Kyoto team a single phrase, embroidered on cloth. Even perfect tools must whisper. They redesign the interface within a week. The phrase? Taken from one of Watanabe's memos from 1993. Meanwhile, on the outside, law enforcement remains baffled. Crime statistics are down. Syndicate visibility near zero. Surveillance footage reveals nothing more than well-dressed men carrying briefcases, entering buildings, leaving no trace. There are no recordings, no fingerprints, no meetings to interrupt. The police begin calling it the fog wall. They know there's something there, but everything they try passes through it unchanged. One detective, when asked during a debrief how the organization remains so stable, replies, "It's not that they're avoiding us, it's that we're not important to their rhythm." At an Interpol conference, a criminologist presents on post-personality organized crime. His case study is Watanabe. He draws a distinction between fear-based leadership and system-based continuity. He ends his talk with a slide showing nothing but a white square. A pause, then the words, "This is what a real boss leaves behind." Inside Yamaguchi-gumi HQ, the members don't discuss these presentations. They're aware of them, of course. But to speak of Watanabe in external terms feels reductive, like translating brushwork into pixels. Instead, they continue with their routines. Reports written in pen, tea poured at proper temperature, shoes placed neatly by the door, and the white paper still folded, still left untouched. No one replaces it, because if Watanabe taught them anything, it was this. Some messages are only read when you stop trying to unfold them. Winter sharpens. Kobe becomes a city of wool coats and closed collars, breath visible in the early morning air, and vending machines humming slightly louder against the cold. The wind carries less chatter now, more silence. And within that silence, something pulses, steady, faint, familiar. The Yamaguchi-gumi headquarters holds its stillness with reverence. The third-floor tatami room remains untouched, but visited more often. No one speaks there. They just sit. They bring no reports. They make no calls. They leave behind no evidence, only a slight rearrangement of their own posture. Outside the room, operations continue perfectly, but something new has begun to ripple across the surface. A suggestion, not a crisis. A murmur, not a movement. Some of the youngest members, those born after Watanabe's prime, raised under his protocols but not his presence, begin to wonder aloud. They don't question his methods, they question their own limits within them. What if clarity could come faster? Shouldn't silence be strategic, not sacred? When do we stop preserving and start building? To the older ranks, these questions feel premature. To others, they feel inevitable. And so, for the first time in nearly 2 decades, an internal council is held. Not a vote, not a challenge, just a gathering. Chairs are arranged in a circle. Tea is served. The room smells faintly of cedar and protocol. The agenda? What next? No one brings notes. No one invokes Watanabe by name, but he's there in how they wait before speaking, in how they let sentences finish before replying, in how the first to speak is not the highest ranking, but the quietest. He begins with a question. Do you feel him less? And no one says yes, but no one says no. Instead, they sit in it, let the air fill in. Eventually, someone else speaks. She's right. One of the juniors. We can't confuse maintenance with growth. Another voice. But growth at what cost? We exist because he didn't hurry. A third. Maybe it's not about going faster. Maybe it's about remembering how to move while still watching the ground. The room nods. A small one. Muted. But agreement. They begin charting ideas, not plans. Possibilities. Extensions of rhythm rather than deviations. And with each suggestion, someone always adds the same question. Would it still feel like him? That becomes the new filter. Not approval, not tradition. Alignment, because Watanabe never asked to be followed. He asked to be understood. And understanding, as they've learned, takes more time than obedience. By spring, small reforms take root. Training manuals are updated, but not rewritten. They now include blank pages labeled, "To be filled by the rhythm of the room." A digital platform is tested, for internal scheduling only. The interface mimics traditional scroll layout. Users must pause 3 seconds between entries. An annual report is issued for the first time, written entirely in the form of tanka poetry. And still, through it all, Watanabe lingers. In one instance, a branch office in Sendai makes an uncharacteristically aggressive move on a contract. It's efficient, profitable, bold. But the week after, they receive a package, no sender. Inside, a single scale from a koi fish, lacquered and set inside a glass slide. No note. The contract is renegotiated with softer terms. Why? Because everyone remembers the story. Watanabe once spent 3 hours watching a koi swim in a too small pond. He didn't say a word. But the next day, he funded a new one. Larger, deeper. He said only, "A koi that forgets water can't be trusted with current." Even the fish remember him. And yet, despite the stillness, despite the perfection of his architecture, the question comes again. Where is he? Not from doubt. From missing. A kind of ache. Not because he's needed, but because absence, when felt too long, begins to carry the weight of unfinished ritual. In April, a group of mid-level officers gathers on the anniversary of his last known appearance. They meet privately, with no announcement. They bring no wine, no speeches, just items. One brings the first internal memo he ever received, still folded. Another brings a photograph, never published, of Watanabe's back as he exited a train. Another brings silence. Together, they place the items in a box. Not buried, not locked, just set aside. It becomes known informally as the Contingency. Not a shrine, just a placeholder, because many people still think he could walk through the door tomorrow. So what do you think? Is a legacy complete when it ends? Or when it begins producing new echoes without instructions? Can a man who vanished without announcement return without footsteps? And would anyone even ask why? Or would they just pour tea, move one seat to the left, and fold the paper once again in perfect quarters? Cherry blossoms arrive in Kobe without apology, petal by petal, like soft confessions from a season that doesn't care whether anyone's ready. They swirl through alleyways, cling to the corners of windshields, and drift across the front steps of buildings that were never built for beauty, but now wear it briefly, unbidden. At Yamaguchi-gumi headquarters, nothing changes, and yet everything does. The blossoms reach the bonsai in the third-floor tatami room. One morning, a single petal finds its way onto the folded paper. No one touches it. By afternoon, it's gone. Wind, maybe, or respect. Watanabe's silence is no longer absence. It's become presence by default. He is now part of the building's materials. Its grain, its shadows, its pauses between elevator chimes. Still, a quiet shift is underway. One of the younger lieutenants, barely 30, proposes a modest public gesture. Not press, not exposure, just a symbolic sponsorship of a community garden in Kobe's old quarter. No names, no plaques, just action. A return of grace to the city that held them. The elders resist at first. Then remember something. Watanabe once said, "Let the city suspect kindness, but never confirm it." They approve the project. The garden opens in late May. No one knows who funded it, but the paths are laid in hexagonal stone, mirroring the tiles outside Yamaguchi-gumi HQ. And in the center sits a bench carved from a single block of cypress. On its underside, a 5-word engraving. Rest here, but listen forward. The inscription matches Watanabe's handwriting. How? No one explains. Maybe it was found. Maybe it was prepared. Maybe it was never hidden. Elsewhere, other changes bloom. A former logistics manager retires early to open a tea house. He hires ex-members discreetly. The space is minimalist. Each table has a small ink brush and a page of parchment. Guests are invited to write, not speak. The name of the tea house? Margin. One evening, a patron enters wearing a long gray coat and black gloves. He says nothing. Writes nothing. But stays for 2 hours. After he leaves, the parchment at his table holds a single fingerprint. The staff don't speak of it, but they move slower for the rest of the night. Theories multiply. That Watanabe is ill, that he's abroad, that he's buried beneath a temple in Shikoku. But these are theories built on longing, not evidence, because no one truly wants him back. They want what he made, and what he made still functions. In fact, it's expanding. The Echo Initiative now includes an archive, a living anonymous repository where members log the smallest decisions that feel aligned with Watanabe's methods. Each entry is coded only by time, weather, and tea temperature. It's less a database than a meditation. One entry reads, 10:43 a.m. Light drizzle. 57 degrees. Let the driver leave first. He deserved the first silence. Another. 8:17 p.m. Clear sky. 77 degrees. Spoke last in the meeting. Notice the room had fewer creases by then. These are not operational records. They are liturgy. Meanwhile, outside forces continue failing to interpret what the Yamaguchi-gumi has become. Investigators still attempt wiretaps, but find only static. Surveillance drones detect movement, but no pattern. They say it's like filming wind inside a house where all the doors are open. One American analyst describes it as the softest fortress in the world. He says, you don't break it. You get invited or you get ignored. And Watanabe? Still unseen, still unspoken, still the standard. At an event in Tokyo, a closed-door symposium on modern leadership, a Japanese economist delivers a lecture titled The Unbranded Blueprint. The presentation features no names, no images, but the room knows. She ends with a phrase, power isn't always what moves people. Sometimes it's what lets them stay still. Back in Kobe, the contingency box remains sealed, but every year one more item is added. This time, a sheet of rice paper with no folds, pristine, as if the next message hasn't been written yet. Or maybe the blankness is the message. So what do you think? Is Watanabe gone? Or has he simply found the perfect distance, where he doesn't interfere, but still calibrates the silence? June brings weight to the air. Kobe thickens. Not with noise, but with temperature. The rain comes sideways now, a little faster, a little warmer. And in that humid suspension of breath and drizzle, the rhythms of the Yamaguchi-gumi persist, like a clock without hands. Still ticking, still precise, still without needing confirmation. The hallway outside Watanabe's old office now carries a scent, cedar and sandalwood. No one says when it started. Some think it's the bonsai. Others think it's memory, refusing to go scentless. Inside the organization, the culture of echoes has blossomed into something else. Not religion, not worship, but refinement. Every action, every gesture, every transaction, cross-checked not just for legality, but for tone. Does this feel in alignment? Would silence approve? Are we acting or are we reacting? It's become the highest compliment now. That felt like him. A member intercepts a payment 2 hours early, with no blood spilled, and leaves a thank you note behind. That felt like him. A driver reroutes to let an older courier avoid a traffic jam, costing time but saving dignity. That felt like him. A letter arrives at headquarters. No return address, no signature. Just a line written in ink that blurs when touched. A system becomes real when it can disappoint you. The paper smells faintly of chrysanthemum, and no one dares to discard it. Around this time, the broader world begins to sense a presence, though they wouldn't dare call it that. Journalists write about the invisible phase in Japanese organized crime. Sociologists whisper of leadership architecture without personality. Even film studios attempt to adapt the phenomenon, but every script feels wrong. Too loud, too much plot. Because how do you dramatize a whisper? How do you cast a man who's become a method? Meanwhile, smaller groups around Asia quietly adopt elements of the Watanabe blueprint. In Taiwan, a logistics company begins structuring their hierarchy based on mutual pauses rather than title. In Seoul, a consulting firm holds weekly margin hours. Staff are encouraged to not speak, just observe their own operations for 60 minutes. And in Kyoto, a retired calligrapher begins offering private lessons to executives. The lessons involve no writing, only breathing and ink preparation. His only requirement? The student must first sit in silence until he nods. Some wait 20 minutes, some 2 hours. When asked why, he simply says, "Watanabe once watched a page dry. He said you can't rush a thing that never moved in the first place." Even in Kobe, the world around Yamaguchi-gumi begins to shift. Not under pressure, but under influence. One local official, when questioned about a suspicious drop in criminal activity, shrugs and says, "They stopped reacting." That's more terrifying than retaliation. But internally, something else stirs. A pulse, not rebellion, not defiance. Continuity evolving. The lieutenants, now older, begin mentoring differently. Instead of passing down instructions, they assign observation. New members are asked to watch a conversation, but not participate. To sit near a negotiation and record only breath patterns. One young recruit, confused, asks, "When do I start learning the rules?" The response comes softly, "You already are. The rules are how we don't move." And amid all this, still, no Watanabe. But something happens. A change so small it's almost missed. The bonsai in the third-floor room blooms. Just a single flower. White, brief, no one touches it. But someone, quietly, deliberately, adds a new piece of paper beneath it. This one is folded twice, only twice, and on its visible surface, one line appears, written in dark ink. "I left room." That's it. Nothing else. No date, no signature, no fanfare, just space. And in that space, 100 interpretations are born. Some believe he's signaling return. Some think it's permission. Some think he never left. Because truly, how do you measure presence in a structure that never needed a door? How do you define absence when behavior remains shaped? And what is a leader, if not the shadow, that teaches you to move in light? So what do you think? If someone folds the future into silence, hides it in routine, and leaves behind only habits soaked in grace, are they gone? Or are they simply already returned? Without a knock, without a word, just the pause before you realize you're already listening. The summer heat thickens, but the headquarters remains cool. Not by air conditioning, though it's there, but by habit. Curtains drawn in the late morning, floor mats brushed daily, the bonsai's pot rotated a 1/4 inch each Thursday. These aren't traditions, they're responses. Subtle acts of care in a system that still breathes, even if the breath is no longer human. And now, something new stirs. Not from disruption, but from stillness. A letter arrives. No sender. No ink. Just embossed indentations pressed directly into rice paper. When held against the light, the message appears like soft topography, the ghost of language. All structures deserve forgetting. Beneath it, a faint signature, just a character, harmony, the name he never insisted on. It travels through the ranks like wind through grass. No one overreacts, but slowly, behaviors shift. The lieutenants begin drafting succession documents, not out of fear, but completeness. The oldest drivers begin offering rides before being asked. Mid-level operatives begin training not just the steps, but the silences between steps. At the end of the month, a report is submitted with no figures, just a paragraph. All metrics complete, all staff present, rhythm maintained. It's accepted, no questions. Because questions now feel like decorations on a house that's already complete. One rainy evening, a courier returns from a countryside run. He's soaking wet, eyes half closed from the road. Before he unpacks, he walks past his own locker and places a folded cloth at the base of the staircase. He doesn't explain. No one asks. The next day, the rain stops. That cloth is still there, clean, untouched, but understood. Elsewhere, the city breathes in patterns Watanabe would recognize. No major headlines, no police raids, just the slow correction of old rhythms made durable. A university professor begins lecturing on post-leader governance. She uses the Yamaguchi-gumi as her final case study, not for their notoriety, but for their infrastructure. She writes on the board, "Legacy is not what is remembered. It is what functions when memory fades." And she's right, because no one at HQ quotes Watanabe anymore. They invoke him by not quoting. They embody him by not explaining. Even the bonsai now leans with quiet conviction. The petals gone, the branches still held in deliberate imperfection. That's the mark of mastery. Not balance, but a tilt so earned it doesn't need fixing. Late in the summer, a courier finds an envelope tucked into the driver's manual of one of the older sedans. Inside is a single line of calligraphy. "If you read this, I trust you." No one admits to placing it, but the sedan's route is adjusted to include an extra turn, one that saves 2 minutes and avoids a public-facing intersection. The driver never mentions the note again. In an unused storage closet, someone leaves a new folded square of paper. This one? Blank. A nod to the end, or to the beginning. Many people still wonder, is he alive? Is he watching? Or has he fully vanished? So what do you think? If an entire organization can continue to breathe with one man's rhythm, if hundreds of lives move with grace because of instructions never given out loud, if a room can remain sacred long after the feet that shaped it have gone, was he leading, or just listening louder than the rest of us? And now, the final room is closed. The light dims not with grief, but with satisfaction. Because sometimes the greatest exit is no exit at all. So now, dear listener, the story rests. The corridors have quieted. The tea has cooled. And somewhere, in a place not marked on any map, a man named Yoshinori Watanabe fades further into the background he always preferred. Part whisper, part shadow, part perfectly folded page. You've walked beside him for hours now, through bonsai gardens and boardroom pauses, through years where silence ruled sharper than speech and paper carried more weight than blood. Maybe you felt it too. That gentle pull of routine, that reverence for the space between steps. Maybe you didn't need him to speak. Maybe, like his men, you already understood. Because some leaders lead loudly, and some, they become architecture, a hallway, a phrase, a way of sitting, a rhythm that steadies the pulse. So now, as your eyes grow heavy, know that you've just stepped through one of the quietest corridors in history and come out the other side intact. No car chases, no sirens, just a chair that still turned ever so slightly toward the door in case he ever walks through again. Let that thought settle. Let the silence hold you. Let the breath slow to match the pace of those who never rushed. And when sleep comes, because it will, know that you're resting not at the end of a story, but in the margin between legacy and lullaby. Good night.